Chapter 111. Seeing him like this, the clan leaders of the four great clans were unbearably angry. The retired emperor also felt that his own precious imperial grandson was too excessive. He lightly coughed twice. Old third, tell us, what are you thinking in the end? Beligaju lowered his eyes, his eyelashes drooping down like a crow's wing. Wearing white gloves, his slender fingers rested on the chair, rhythmically tapping. It was very obvious that he was thinking about other things. The clan leaders glared at Beligaju's side profile with an indignant expression that said, "Retired emperor, look at him." Eunuch's son, who was standing to the side, had no choice but to use the horsetail whisk in his hand to nudge his master. Bailey Jiaju finally lifted his eyelids and slightly raised his eyebrows. Eunuch's son immediately whispered, "Your Highness, the retired emperor is calling for you." "Your Highness." One of the clan leaders of the four great clans took a step forward, his voice loud and clear. "Regarding the matter of dispatching troops at White Academy, shouldn't you give us a reasonable explanation?" Beligaju absent-mindedly raised his head and glanced at him. That pair of deep eyes made people's scalps go numb. The people who were looked at trembled from head to toe and suddenly had an impulse to retreat. However, this time they were jointly entering the palace, so the third prince wouldn't really dare to do anything to them. Heh. At this moment, Beligaju laughed. His voice was very light, but it was difficult to conceal his innate grace and magnificence. A large number of winged beasts appeared, and even a fire chelan appeared. Elder Nye's meaning is for me to look on helplessly as the students are captured? That clan leader stared blankly. This isn't right. At that time, Your Highness dispatched troops to capture that hellion, Elder Nye. Beligaju leisurely interrupted the clan leader's words. "I only dispatched troops after receiving the news that there was something strange in Spirit Forest. As for the search for Hellion Vivian, it was only a matter of convenience." That clan leader was thoroughly stupefied and turned his head to look at Emperor Murong. Was it like this? Why was this completely different from the information he had received? Murong Wang's expression also stiffened, and so did Su Jiacheng. They looked at each other in dismay and thought of many ways, but they didn't expect that the third prince would actually directly tell them. He dispatched his troops to suppress the divine beast and protect the students. If that was the case, how were they supposed to ask? The patriarchs were all irritable, so much so that the hall, which was originally filled with endless arguments, suddenly became blank. Eunuch's son's expression changed from time to time as he listened. In the end, he had no choice but to worship Beligaju with an extremely admiring gaze. The only one who could lie so confidently was his master. Nangong Lai, as the youngest priest in the War Dragon Empire, was also standing in the main hall. However, his position was relatively hidden, so no one saw that after he heard Beligaju's words, he almost couldn't hold back his laughter. He did not believe that Aju would mobilize his own shadow guards to protect the students. He was definitely fooling those old fools, ha ha ha. A lie. The patriarch standing next to him glanced in his direction. In the War Dragon Empire, priests and saintesses were the same. They all had to wear a veil and put on an incomparably holy robe. Therefore, the patriarch could only see the thick veil and couldn't see Nangong Lai's current expression. If he could see, he definitely wouldn't have the idea of dragging Nangong Lai into the water. As the youngest priest in the Nangong family, shouldn't you say a few words? Nangong Lai originally came to watch the show very well. Suddenly being called out like this, and seeing the cold gaze of the person sitting on the seat of honor, it was almost enough to freeze everyone to death. He swallowed his saliva, then looked at the patriarch with a face full of what the fuck. The patriarch thought that his relationship with the Nangong family was not bad. What's more, he also knew that ever since the third prince lost his martial chi, the priest clan no longer respected the third prince as much as before. Therefore, A Lai would definitely stand on his side. Nangong Lai really did want to stand on his side, because if he stood close enough, he could personally strangle him to death. So what does Lord Priest want to say, Beligaju slightly raised the last syllable. Nangong Lai's back trembled, the corner of his mouth carrying a wicked smile. "Your Highness, our priest clan is only in charge of prophecies. Except for major events, we don't participate in any court politics." Emperor Murong wasn't surprised by Nangong Lai's words. Since ancient times, the priests had been like this. neither fighting nor seizing, but their attitude was presumptuous. They would never nitpick the imperial family's faults, they would only avoid the important and dwell on the trivial. However, since Nangonglai didn't speak up for the third prince, that also meant that the information he received was correct. The priest clan was no longer as loyal to the imperial family as before. Although they didn't obtain any benefits from the third prince when they entered the palace today, it was still worth it. At the very least, they confirmed a very important matter. However, what Emperor Murong didn't expect was that feelings would often be biased. For example, the relationship between Nangonglai and Baligaju. That's right, the priest clan was indeed no longer as loyal to the imperial family as before. However, he overlooked that the priest clan's thoughts didn't represent Nangonglai's thoughts. As the successor of the priest clan, Nangonglai had already chosen the king he would be loyal to in the future. And that king wouldn't be anyone other than Baligaju. This was the tie between the priest clan and the imperial family. They had been brothers for 10 years. As early as when they first met, the little Nangonglai was chosen by the similarly young Baligaju from among thousands of priests to be the priest's successor. His fate was sealed bang. When the 4 great clans' leaders and successors retreated, even the retired emperor returned to his sleeping quarters. The layers upon layers of palace doors instantly turned into a barrier. Not even the slightest sound of wind could be heard. The wicked smile on Nangonglai's face disappeared. His right hand touched his left shoulder as he slightly saluted, "Master." Although the current Baligaju's casual manner was no different from before, standing here, he still had to act. Sure enough, Baligaju lazily lifted his eyelids and raised an eyebrow. "You can directly kneel on the ground." Hearing this, Nangonglai raised his head and stared at Baligaju's ink-black pupils. Just as he wanted to say something, he saw that there wasn't a trace of light in those deep eyes. Nangonglai stared blankly for a moment. His unrestrained expression suddenly changed. "Your eyes." The poison flared up. Baligaju expressionlessly flicked his lapel, his voice indifferent. Nangonglai's eyes widened. "Then why did you come to see that group of old men? Aren't you afraid they'll find out and rebel?" Baligaju sneered, no longer needing to conceal his wicked aura. He said each word with a wicked chill. "They dare." Chapter 112. Nangonglai shook off the goosebumps on his body, lightly coughed a few times and said, "Recently, many people in the clan have rebelled, and the people under my command have also followed suit. Although I wouldn't be so bold as to come in front of you and throw away my life, I still want to see what kind of state you're in right now, so that I can wait for an opportunity to act." Baligaju quietly listened without speaking. His long sleeves fluttered, and a faintly discernible double image seemed to appear beside him. But Nangonglai seemed to have seen something he shouldn't have seen. His eyes widened as he heavily took a big step back. "You?" Nangonglai's astonishment was obvious. He slowly moved his gaze away from the double image, and then placed it on Baligaju's face. "Last night, the fire Qilin didn't appear on its own. Was it summoned by you?" Baligaju faintly hummed, his fingertips supporting his forehead, unmoved, still as graceful as a noble. Nangonglai smiled, his evil aura surging. "You clearly hate being involved with anyone the most, but for a woman you even summoned the fire Qilin back. Ju, don't tell me you're only treating her as your prey." "What else?" Baligaju raised his eyes, his voice cold. "You want to use that set of divination results to fool people again? The Red Phoenix Star movement, Nangonglai saw the displeased expression in his eyes, leisurely smiled and changed the topic. "I'm only worried that you've played too much, and forgotten the proper business. Since the fire Qilin has returned, then wouldn't all the martial qi in your body be coming back soon?" Baligaju didn't pay attention to his words, only his left hand slightly moved, his long sleeves fluttering in the air, graceful and elegant. The barrier disappeared, and Eunuch Sun stood outside the hall with a blank face. Baligaju swept a glance at him, his pair of eyes floating up and down. "Invite Grandmaster Zizun over." "That old man Zizun is also here?" Nangonglai turned his head and whispered, "Shouldn't he be busy with the martial qi competition that's coming soon?" It said that if anyone approached him, he would very arrogantly say to them, "I don't have time." How could he appear in the palace now? Nangonglai carried this kind of question, Just as he turned around, he met Grandmaster Zizun's gaze. Ha 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 ha. Nangong Lai stared blankly for a moment before bursting into laughter. He laughed so hard that tears were about to come out. He pointed at Grandmaster Zizun with one hand and covered his stomach with the other. Old man, where did you get robbed? These clothes, haha, aren't they too unique? The corners of Zizun's mouth twitched as he snorted coldly. However, it was as if Beligaju didn't see this scene. He politely and gracefully instructed the shadow beside him, untie Grandmaster Zizun. Yes. Shadow bowed his head respectfully. Zizun glared at them. It wasn't easy for him to regain his freedom, but just as he was about to curse them, Beligaju spoke again. I have a headache right now. The imperial physician has just diagnosed that I can't listen to loud noises. Hearing this, Eunuch Sun almost choked to death on his own saliva. When did an imperial physician come to the ghost palace? Master, even if you're lying, you need to have some evidence. Beligaju's expression didn't change as he turned the black jade thumb ring on his hand. If I listen to too much noise, my temper will become very bad, very bad. Therefore, it's best for Grandmaster to think clearly before speaking. His voice was very light, but it carried an ice-cold texture. Zizun thought in his heart, this is fucking threatening me. But mommy, his scalp still went numb. I have nothing to say. Zizun turned his face away and said with integrity, I still have the same old words. I won't tell you where my obedient disciple went. Beligaju curved his thin lips into a smile that wasn't a smile. Then, he unhurriedly stood up from his seat and walked in front of Zizun. He patted Zizun's shoulder as if he was praising him. How come I didn't realize you had such a backbone before? There are many things you didn't realize. Zizun coldly snorted. What? Now you've changed your mind and want to take me as your master? Let me tell you, there's no such possibility. My current disciple is very good. I don't need you understand. At the same time, the old man Eunuch Sun turned around and wiped his cold sweat. Grandmaster Zizun was really courting death. Because he couldn't see, Beligaju's gaze didn't move at all. He only stared at Zizun, and the curve at the corner of his mouth was exceptionally charming and dazzling. I also don't need you. However, I just said that I don't want to hear any noise, a lie. Here. Nangong Lai's body shifted, and he put his hand on Zizun's shoulder. He smiled evilly. Come, old man, let's talk properly. Grandmaster Zizun's eyes fiercely glared. Lie brat, you dare. You dare to do this to me. Huff, 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 huff. No matter how hard Grandmaster Zizun tossed and turned, he still couldn't resist the hypnosis technique of the capital's #1 priest. Nangong Lai's hands held the crystal ball that rose between the two of them. He pushed aside the thick white fog and his eyes flashed. He lifted his eyes and looked towards Beligaju. Hellion Vivian went to the armament convention. Armament convention? Beligaju pondered as he repeated these 4 words. The temperature in his eyes seemed to be cooling down little by little. Nangong Lai didn't sense it in the slightest. He casually leaned his body back. You know the second most handsome man in the capital? He's the son of the chairman of the armament convention, right? The armament convention this time is different from the ones in the past. In the past, the armament convention was merely to appraise whether or not people had the qualifications to become an armament master. This year, the successor of the Lianqing clan, Wuxia, made an astonishing armament. This armament was made from the best materials in the world, but because of its appearance and performance, it can only be used by girls. That's why right now, all of those young ladies from influential families in the entire capital are thinking of how they can take advantage of any opportunity to get into contact with this Jing Wuxia. But what's interesting is that that person is the same as you. He never took the initiative to contact anyone. Even the invitations of the ministers were beautifully declined by him. This year's armament convention should be extremely marvelous. Gotcha. Following Nangong Lai's words, the teacup in Beligaju's hand completely shattered into powder. He slowly opened his hand. Those fragments fell little by little from his palm and fell to the ground. The atmosphere in the main hall suddenly froze to the extreme. Even Nangong Lai didn't understand. Why was it that after Aju found out about that woman's whereabouts, he instead seemed to be angry? How could he know that as soon as Beligaju heard the words armament convention, The image of that carriage stopped at the city gate in the early morning flashed through his mind. At that time that woman was there. Inside that carriage. The reason why he didn't discover her was because Jing Wushuang covered for her. Good, really good. He actually forgot. That little fox didn't have any other skills. She only knew how to attract bees and butterflies. Chilin. Beligaju commanded. That faintly discernible shadow of a beast appeared. Its attitude was respectful. Present. Make some preparations. We're going to Armament City. The ice-like voice reverberated in the middle of the main hall. Layer upon layer, it didn't retreat for a long time. Chapter 113. The next morning a gentle breeze blew. The world-famous Armament City was located at the peak of Tsang Mountain Range. It had the largest armament trading company in the entire Divine Continent. Some people said that the most talented armament masters in the world were all gathered here. Some people also said that here you didn't know what kind of people you would meet. Perhaps an unremarkable old woman would be able to tell whether an armament was good or bad. To a martial artist this was without a doubt a heaven within a heaven. However, even in heaven there would be casinos. Place your bets. Place your bets. The casino was bustling with noise and excitement. White smoke was sparse, and everywhere was filled with dust that hadn't seen light for a long time. People of all shapes and sizes were all different. Some were standing, some were sitting, and some were staring at the dice cup on the table that was about to open. Their mouths were shouting, "Small, small, small." The corners of the mouth of the person holding the dice cup slightly curled as he reached out and opened it. Damn! Why is it big again? A person wearing a white brocade wiped the sweat on his forehead. With one look, one could tell that he was the kind of person who had red eyes from losing. He gripped the fine silver in his hand and loudly shouted, "I don't believe in this evil. I'll bet small, continue to bet small." The person whose eyes were red from losing was none other than Armament City's famous hedonistic little tyrant. His appearance was delicate and pretty, and he was originally only 16 or 17 years old. Two shallow dimples hung on his cheeks. He was simply the modern world's top student of high school. As he spoke he only heard a bang sound. He reached out and pressed the fine silver on the small sign. Unexpectedly, a paper fan suddenly blocked his hand. "This brother, are you sure you want to bet small?" Hearing this, the little tyrant turned his head and looked over. He only saw a young master in a painting appear in front of him. That person was very handsome with a fair face. His phoenix eyes were slightly raised, and they were dyed with a faint evil aura. "Why do you care which one I bet on?" The person with red eyes from losing was vexed. What he hated the most was this kind of good-looking person with a steady temperament. His words also became impolite. However, what he didn't expect was that that person only looked at him with a smile. She reached out and put away the paper fan. Then with a turn of her wrist, she pressed the fine silver on the big sign in front of that person. The little tyrant, whose eyes had turned red from losing, frowned. She turned around and fiercely glared at her. "Place your bets. Place your bets." The voice of the dealer who was shaking the dice cup was surprisingly pleasant to the ears. As he waved his long sleeves, the dice cup was shaken in a daze. Finally there was a loud bang. "Take the cup and open it. Small, 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 give me a small one." When the little tyrant's handsome face said the word daddy, it would always give people a different kind of comical feeling. 5-5 for big, the banker swiftly announced. Then, he took the money and split it in half before pushing the jade-like young master away. The young master held the silver pieces, and the smile on his face deepened. Following that, the little tyrant bet small and she bet big. The little tyrant was betting big, so she was betting small. In any case, he was the exact opposite of the little tyrant who had lost so much that his eyes were red. After a dozen or so rounds, the noble young master's money grew more and more, while the little tyrant lost everything. At this moment, little tyrant had also sensed something. In the end, he stopped betting and watched as that noble young master bet. Every single round was won by him. Gradually, the little tyrant's handsome face turned from annoyance to admiration. In the end he even widened his mouth in amazement. As though he had achieved the effect he wanted, that noble young master kept the money on the table, raised his paper fan and planned to leave. Little Tyrant immediately followed after him. Not only him, even those bodyguards who were serving him behind him took another glance in astonishment, and hurriedly ran off. That young master placed his fan on the side of his leg, and lazily yawned. As though he had sensed that someone was following behind him, he did not point it out. Only, the smile on his face was tinged with traces of shrewdness. Seeing that the person was about to leave, Little Tyrant shouted loudly with a red face. "Hey!" That young master curved his thin lips, and then turned his head. "Is something the matter?" Cough. Little Tyrant placed his hand next to his lips. Most likely, he was planning to make himself look more mature, as even his voice was suppressed to an extremely low volume. "How do you know when to bet big and when to bet small?" That young master smiled, and his eyes were picturesque. "Haven't you heard of the saying, out of 10 bets, 1 is cheating?" Of course, this young master has heard of it. The handsome young man coldly snorted, and then glanced at that young master. He was extremely proud. It's just that this young master still doesn't know how to use it. Saying that he doesn't know in such a righteous manner, this is really enough. Young Master Gui's feet slipped, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "Hey!" When the handsome young man spoke, he would always give people an extremely exquisite handsomeness. "If you teach me everything you know, this young master will give you a lot of money. How about it?" He had to learn these things, so that when he saw that person again, he wouldn't lose every single time. No one knew that when the handsome young man lowered his eyes, the killing intent that flashed past the corner of his eyes was something that should not be present at his age. "I don't want money." The noble young master's voice slowly sounded. "However, I can teach you for free what out of 10 bets 9 is cheating means." "Oh." The handsome young man raised his eyebrows and also laughed. "That's actually very interesting. How do you plan on teaching this young master?" The noble young master took a step forward, his thin lips carrying a meaningful taste. "In 2 days, young Master Wu Shuang will hold a small test here in order to find a suitable owner for that armament of his. Right now, many people are certain that Helian Jiaoer will definitely win." Helian Jiaoer. The handsome young man absent-mindedly tightened his pupils. "The number 1 beauty in the capital, who has been designated to be the 3rd prince's consort?" The noble young master raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "That's right, it's her." "And then?" The handsome young man slowly opened his mouth. "Don't tell me there's someone more powerful than her?" The noble young master's thin lips raised. "Of course there's someone. For example?" The handsome young man narrowed his eyes. The noble young master smiled. "Helian Vivian. That good for nothing." The handsome young man intuitively wrinkled his eyebrows. The noble young master touched the bridge of his nose. He didn't expect that her reputation would be so big. Even the son of the city lord, who was far away in Armament City, knew her. That's right, this elegant noble young master was none other than the Helian Vivian who had spent all the money she had to rush to Armament City. She stood there with delicate features and an outstanding temperament. Although she, who was dressed as a man, didn't give people the feeling of being incomparably stunning as the female lead, relying on her appearance, she was already at the level of being gentle and elegant like jade. Walking in the crowd, she could attract the attention of many young girls. "Why aren't you talking?" The handsome young man suspiciously raised his eyebrows. Helian Vivian lightly coughed and then said, "It's because everyone thinks that Helian Vivian is a good-for-nothing that when the time comes, we'll be able to earn more money." Chapter 114. It's actually a good idea. After the beautiful young man heard all of Helian Vivian's plans, he revealed his canine teeth at the corner of his mouth. Helian Vivian looked at him with a smile on her face, as if she was waiting for him to make a decision. That beautiful young man raised his eyebrows and sized her up with a glance. After that, he slowly said, "Guards, listen to my orders. Cooperate with this person's actions. This young master wants to set up his own gambling house." Just like that, on the second day, Armament City welcomed the largest-scale gambling house. The gambling house was set up on one side of the armament assembly. One after another, people from the armament school entered the arena. The bets outside were also getting bigger and bigger. Those who bet on Helian Jiaoer's victory came one after another. It was packed to the brim. A carriage rolled over the jade-green ground. The wheels were made of the most low-key luxurious silver-white color. Just like that, it stopped at the roadside, as if it had occupied all of the elegance. "Master." The voice of the person driving the carriage was very low. His handsome face was exposed under the sunlight. Looking carefully, his hair was actually somewhat red. Even his pupils seemed to have a red light flashing through when he lowered his eyes. "We've arrived. Enter." It was only a short 2 words, but it gave people a kind of irresistible ice cold. Separated by the carriage curtain, no one knew who was inside the carriage. They could only faintly see a tall and straight figure. His slender fingers were leisurely turning the pinky ring on his little finger, full of an ascetic aura. Coachman lowering his head, his thin lips hooked up. He respectfully responded, "Yes." In the field, the cross-dressing Hellion Vivian extended her hand to support her chin. Her fingers played back and forth with the paper fan in the center of her palm. The more people who bet on Hellion Jiaoer, the wider the smile on the corner of her mouth. "This time I can actually make a huge profit." When the white cat heard this, it was very disapproving. However, it couldn't help but admire this woman's ability to make money. Looks like escaping from White Academy this time was really the right choice. Hellion Vivian's slender legs were slightly crossed. Without any restraints, she looked more free and easy than when she was in the capital. She curved her thin lips and said with an evil aura, "No one bet on me winning. Xiaobai, you go and bet these 100 taels of silver on my side. The more you buy, the more you win." "I can't transform into a human, how can I go?" The white cat raised its eyebrows coldly. Hellion Vivian smiled shrewdly. "I just saw a black wind horse helping its master choose a side. There seems to be a lot of divine beasts here." "That's because there's a world-class armament master here." The white cat glanced at her. "So, you must be careful during the competition." Hellion Vivian blinked and didn't say anything else. Not far away, a pair of deep eyes looked condescendingly at the master and servant who were whispering downstairs. A glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. The man's figure was very good. His legs were slender and powerful. His upper body was tall and straight. His white clothes fluttered in the wind. Just by sitting there quietly, he emitted an oppressive aura. He held a cup of tea in his hand. His fingertips that stayed on the cup inadvertently increased their strength. Those 2 sexy thin lips were not tainted with the slightest trace of lust, like an immortal from the 9th heaven. The coachman standing by his side laughed. A red light flashed in his eyes. "Master, wait for me. I'll go and help you catch the prey right now." The man glanced sideways. His expression was indifferent and his eyes were cold. The coachman paused and retracted his steps. No matter how he looked at that expression, it was terrifying. The coachman's scalp went numb and he lightly licked his lower lip. The man leisurely sipped his tea and said without any expression, "Follow the white cat. You bet on whoever it bet on. Bet on 10 times the amount." "Yes." The coachman accepted the order in a low voice. However, he didn't understand why his master was doing this. The man only looked at the figure dressed as a man below the stage. The corners of his mouth slowly pulled open into a charming and evil smile. "Achoo!" Hellion Vivian rubbed her arms and looked left and right. She didn't know why, but from the beginning her back was a little cold. Could it be that she was wearing too little? Wait, she had to quickly finish her makeup and put on a set of clothes. She was going to become a black coal ball again. Just as Hellion Vivian was sighing, the white cat came back. It walked over and said in a faint voice, "I just looked at the list. So far only you have bet on you." "Very good." Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips in satisfaction. She seemed to be able to see all the silvers growing wings and flying towards her. Life couldn't be better. When the people saw the list, they all laughed out loud. There are actually people who bet on that trash to win. There must be something wrong with their heads. Hearing this, the responsible coachman turned his head and looked at his master. He saw that his master still had a cold expression, as if he didn't hear those people's words. Sometimes, as an ancient mythological beast, he really couldn't guess what his master was thinking. Time passed quickly, and the organizers had already taken their seats on the judging platform one after another. The most eye-catching person at the banquet was the peerless young master in white, Lianqing Wushuang. His side profile looked more cultured and elegant than ever before. His every movement carried a faint elegance. Just by sitting there, he attracted everyone's attention. This included the Hellion Jiao. Today she was wearing a white and pink gauze dress. The collar was made of the finest fox fur. Her small oval face carried a smile. When her eyes fell on Jing Wushuang, she remembered what the servant girl had said to her before. Her beautiful eyes carried a delicate charm. This young Master Wushuang was indeed very attractive. Being adored by such a man made the Hellion Jiao feel even more confident. Even the corners of her mouth rose a little. The Hellion Jiao's figure was like a willow. Her steps were like a lotus as she stood in the corner. She was shy yet gentle, causing the crowd to exclaim in surprise. The organizer was introducing her Shang Fang. The Hellion Jiao wore a thin veil. She was like a fairy standing in the clouds, enjoying the support of mortals. Suddenly she seemed to have seen something. Her small face suddenly showed a malicious malevolence. She looked at the crowd. It's her. Hellion Vivian. So this cheap woman really came. She thought that those gambling games were just a joke. After all, ever since Hellion Vivian left White Academy, she had already thought that this cheap woman was dead. Since she was still haunting like a ghost, then she would ruthlessly humiliate this cheap woman today, so that she could understand the difference between a person and a person. The Hellion Jiao walked over like a lotus. Her red lips slightly raised. Her voice was crisp like a warbler's. Big sister, I didn't expect to meet you here. Is young Master He also with you? You left the academy in the middle of the night, and didn't think about your family's reputation. Father will also follow and make things difficult. Hellion eldest sister? Who was that? The capital's biggest joke. Not to mention that she didn't have an ounce of martial qi. She was still not stable even after the engagement was broken off. She forcibly relied on her thick skin to curry favor with Grandmaster Zizun. Did she really think that by becoming Grandmaster Zizun's disciple, she could identify martial cultivators? Ridiculous. Chapter 115. Hellion Vivian stood in the middle of these 10,000 people's disdainful gazes. Her eyes glittered and her face was indifferent, as if she didn't care the least bit about the people's discussions. Her pair of clear eyes slowly swept all around and finally landed on Hellion Jiao's body. Home? Have you forgotten that I've long been removed from the Hellion clan by you and that ungrateful father of yours? This Hellion eldest miss is really boorish. Look at younger sister, then look at older sister. Just based on their appearances, you can tell who's good and who's evil. Come on, how good can a person who escaped from the academy in the middle of the night be? Listening to everyone's discussions, Hellion Jiao lowered her head and pretended to use a handkerchief to wipe the corners of her eyes. I know that eldest sister hates me. As she spoke, she slowly withdrew her gaze from Hellion Vivian's body. Once again, she put on an understanding appearance and bashfully smiled at everyone. Everyone, don't talk about eldest sister like that. She's only angry. It's all my fault. As expected, she once again provoked a round of praises for being beautiful and kind. Hellion Vivian uninterestedly curled her vermilion lips. Acting one way in front of people, acting another way behind people. Hellion Jiao wasn't tired of this kind of trick, but she was tired of seeing it. Hellion Jiao pinched her handkerchief and said hesitantly, "But eldest sister hasn't even come into contact with armaments. Why would you come to the armaments convention? Did you deliberately come to make your presence known? If it's really like this, younger sister advises eldest sister to stop." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and looked at the expressions of the people below the stage. As expected, there was a bit more disdain. Those gazes that fell on her were like looking at a bedbug in a ditch, emitting a strong sense of disdain. She completely didn't care and slowly smiled, calm and composed. Stop? She still hadn't earned any money, why would she stop? Heizei also didn't know that Hellion Vivian would appear here. After all, when they were discussing this, there simply wasn't this segment. At that time, they had only said that they would bring their own martial cultivation to the auction house to auction. That was why Hei's had been camping at the auction for the past 2 days. After waiting for half a day, he still didn't see his partner. He even thought that the other party wouldn't appear. He hadn't expected that she would actually come here directly to participate in the armament test. Hei's furrowed his brows and stared unblinkingly at the activity on the stage with a serious expression. Even the page boy beside him was not used to it. On the other hand, the guard sitting in the other private room raised his eyebrows worriedly. Young master, this bet is too big. If this Hellion Vivian can't win, then, I see. The beautiful young man sitting on the seat of honor acted as if he didn't hear the guard's words and muttered to himself, "Is it a disguise? Doesn't look like it." The guard's eyes flashed. Disguise? What their Guru family was most proficient in was disguise techniques, and the young master's disguise technique was one of the best in the entire Dragon War Empire. No matter who the other party was, no matter what kind of disguise they made, the young master would always be able to see through their authenticity in the first moment. That beautiful young man seemed to have encountered an extremely interesting matter. His long and narrow eyes were bright and somewhat cold. I really didn't expect that the Hellion family's good-for-nothing ugly girl's original appearance was like that. Interesting, really interesting to the extreme. That guard was increasingly unable to understand what his family's young master was saying. However, what made him apprehensive was the light in the young master's eyes. That kind of pondering, as if he had found a toy that caught his eye. And the thing that caught the young master's eye, under normal circumstances, only had one end, and that was to be destroyed. This point was really inherited from the people on that side. However, compared to that highness, the young master was still considered cute. At least when he couldn't get what he wanted, he would just let it go after throwing a tantrum. And that highness, his thoughts were deep, and not many people could escape from him. When he was young, the young master was miserably tricked by that highness. The guard silently turned his head and glanced again at the beautiful young man with an exquisite appearance. He didn't know whether or not the young master still bore a grudge against that highness for wearing women's clothing. What? The beautiful young man knocked on the table. His long and narrow eyes raised and swept a glance at the guard. That guard thought about how to phrase it and then said, "This subordinate received news from the Imperial Palace." When he heard the two words Imperial Palace, the beautiful young man's back slightly shook. He coldly smiled and curved his lips. "Continue." "That highness seems to have also come." The guard raised his head and looked at the sky. "Right now, I don't know whether or not he has entered the city. However, he should be traveling secretly. He didn't bring a single shadow guard with him." Boom! That beautiful young man grabbed the guard's collar and pulled him over. His voice lowered very, very low. "Find an opportunity to capture him. Young master, that is His Highness the Prince." The guard wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He thought to himself that even if you guys are cousins, you still can't be so insolent. The beautiful young man's eyes narrowed again and again. "Don't be afraid. Listen to this young master. Get him." Since ancient times, Armament City was different from other cities. Because it had a special status, this place was also not under the control of the imperial family. In short, the beautiful young man only wanted to express one meaning, and that was that this was their territory. Whoever they wanted to capture could be captured. The guard thought for a moment and said, "You should still think about it. Right now, your body still hasn't recovered. It's not suitable to directly confront His Highness the Prince." "No need to think about it." The beautiful young man revealed two beautiful canine teeth. That year, when he tricked me into wearing women's clothing, he also didn't think about it. This young master will say it again. Get him. Right now, he doesn't even have a bit of martial chi. It's very convenient to make a move. The guard coughed heavily. He especially wanted to say, "Young master, this is an unfair victory." But when he thought about it, young master and that His Highness were competing to see who was more shameless when they were young, yes. In the end, the guard accepted the order. The beautiful young man smiled and solemnly instructed, "Capture him alive." The guard. This no one would dare to kill His Highness. All right, you can withdraw. This young master still wants to continue watching the show. The beautiful young man waved his hand. The light in his eyes that was looking at Hellion Vivian mixed with a different flavor from the past. Using a man's identity to approach him? This Hellion Vivian was actually very smart. It was just unknown whether she really knew how to distinguish armaments, or whether she was just pretending. In reality, almost everyone thought that Hellion Vivian coming to the armament assembly was a joke. They certainly hadn't forgotten that just a month ago, Hellion Vivian had shamelessly gone to that little armaments test held at the Phoenix building. In the end, she only stayed there for a short while before she was impatiently driven out by Master Tu Lao. Now, in this kind of sacred place where armaments masters gathered, she still dared to come and cause trouble. She was simply throwing away her own face. Chapter 116. Pung. The drum hammer fell. The competitors all returned to their respective positions. As they brushed past each other, Helian Jiaoer lowered her voice next to Wei Wei's ear. If you don't want to lose miserably, I advise you to get the hell out of here as soon as possible. After that, hide in a remote and desolate place and peacefully spend the rest of your life. Otherwise, don't expect yourself to be as lucky as before. Towards this kind of provocation, Helian Vivian only raised her eyebrows and smiled, carrying a ruffian air that others couldn't grasp. After all, if a dog bites you, you can't bite back, right? Woman, you're being looked down upon again. Yuan Ming's lazy voice transmitted from the space. Helian Vivian curved her lips and glanced towards the gambling house. This is the effect I wanted. What? You're finally going to reveal your true strength? Yuan Ming became excited. Helian Vivian looked at the armaments that were slowly being pushed onto the stage not far away. She didn't say anything, but the smile on her lips made Yuan Ming's blood boil. Young master. Standing behind Jing Wushuang to serve, Liang Bai saw Helian Vivian's appearance on the stage and a trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. That face of hers, Jing Wushuang indifferently grunted. His jade-like handsome face still didn't have the slightest bit of expression. He only took a sip of tea. His eyes indifferently swept towards the woman standing like a pine tree in the middle of the hall and slightly lowered his eyelashes. Liang Bai looked at his young master's lukewarm appearance and thought in his heart that he wasn't as calm as his young master. Looking at Helian Vivian's face now, he was a bit suspicious that the fairy-like person he had seen before wasn't an illusion. That was a bit too dark, right? Probably because of the color of her skin. All the good points on her body seemed to be covered up and buried in the dust, making her look unremarkable. Clang! The sound of the wooden hammer made Liang Bai suddenly come back to his senses. The competition had officially begun. A total of 18 armaments were lined up one after another on the wooden table. They were all different in shape and the materials used were also different. Every single one of them had its own purpose, and every single one of them had come from the hands of a martial arts master. To pick out an armament forged by young Master Wu Shuang from so many armaments was simply beyond difficult. Those who were familiar with young Master Wu Shuang could still make a comparison. Continuing his previous habit, they picked out that armament from the pile. But what about those who were not familiar with young Master Wu Shuang? This was like searching for a needle in a haystack. There was no clue at all. The new batch of armament masters glanced at each other and saw the distress in each other's eyes. Even Helian Jiaoer couldn't make up her mind. In reality, when martial artists were selecting armaments, they would look at the size of the martial qi emitted by the armaments. The stronger the martial qi, the better the martial skill. Helian Jiaoer herself was a 9th-stage martial artist. Her perception towards martial qi was considered to be one of the best among this group of people. It was very obvious that she was hesitating between that green jade longsword and the black tortoise bow and arrow, these two armaments. There was another most important point in selecting armaments, and that was that time was very important. If you took a fancy to this armament, and the other party also took a fancy to this armament, then whoever wanted to snatch it would be considered the winner. Therefore, when the gong sounded, everyone rushed to the front of the 18 armaments and crazily stroked and caressed those armaments. Only Helian Vivian didn't immediately move. Instead, she slid her hand over the surface of those armaments inch by inch. The light in her eyes was so deep that people couldn't see through what she was thinking. Below the stage, someone laughed out loud. Look at her. She wouldn't be stupid, right? I reckon that she simply doesn't know which armament to start with. Without martial qi, she can't even use the most basic perception ability. Looks like we're definitely going to win this bet. That goes without saying, ha ha ha. Mocking laughter continuously transmitted over. When those aristocratic young masters saw this, they also pondered and laughed along. Sounds very interesting. Hey, I say, should we also bet and see who wins and who loses? Sure. Immediately, someone agreed. Lord, who do you plan to bet on? That goes without saying. I'm definitely betting on Helian Jiaoer to win. Murong Changfeng didn't listen to the surrounding mocking. He absent-mindedly made a sound of N, and then he intentionally bet some money on Helian Jiaoer. Basically, all of the young masters sitting in the private room had bet, and those who bet on Helian Vivian to lose received the full amount. That's not right. Not the full amount. There were still 2 people who bet on Helian Vivian to win. One was Helian Vivian herself. The other one. Everyone looked at that list of names in disbelief. Their eyes were filled with shock. How could that person be here? Moreover, he always didn't put anything in his eyes, let alone gambling. But this time, he actually bet so much money on Helian Vivian. Just when those aristocratic young masters were incomparably shocked. The deep and languid voice rang out again, sounding very calm. Raise the stakes. This voice. Some people looked towards the private room at the side. After Murong Changfeng heard this sentence, the hand holding the teacup tightened by 3 degrees. Is it the royal family? Someone asked, not certain. But then they heard that deep and low voice again. Add another 100 taels of gold on Helian Vivian. Bet that she wins. What? When everyone heard this sentence, they all frowned. How could that trash who didn't know how to do anything possibly win? What's more, wasn't she already panicking right now? She didn't even know the most basic martial chi sensing. She could only foolishly stand there. If she didn't move, others would decide which armament to choose. Woman, what's wrong? Is it very difficult this time? Yuan Ming arrogantly raised the corner of his mouth. Seeing that she wasn't as quick as she usually was, he also started to have some doubts. Helian Vivian's fingers rested on her chin. Her fingertips lightly tapped her chin. Then she slowly closed her eyes. What is she doing? Now she's not even looking. Yuan Ming listened to the noise all around and frowned. Woman, if it's too difficult, I can… Yuan Ming, don't use your demon's words to tempt me. Helian Vivian opened her eyes. Her bright black eyes looked up. Then she walked towards that wooden table. The people below the stage laughed disdainfully. Even the judges on the stage shook their heads. I'm afraid this Helian Vivian has no hope. She only started to choose now. Compared to the others, she's slower by half. Jing Wushuang's side profile was still as cultured and refined as before. Only this time he unexpectedly opened his mouth, accompanied by a light cough as clear as water. Not necessarily. Chapter 117. For a moment the judging panel was quiet to the extreme. As if they didn't expect that young Master Wu Shuang would speak up for a good-for-nothing, those judges one after another looked towards the side of Jing Wushuang's face. Their eyes carried astonishment. The latter's eyes were indifferent, without the slightest ripple. Perhaps young Master Wu Shuang was only kind-hearted and didn't want to casually deny someone. However, since young Master Wu Shuang said so, then they'll wait and see. However, they still felt that the result was already decided. That Helian Vivian wouldn't win. Maybe her luck would be good and she would pick up something. But to choose the one personally made by young Master Wu Shuang among all these armaments, luck was far from enough. The judges looked at each other and each of them had the choice in their hearts. This time's armament test, only young Master Wu Shuang knew the correct answer. Even they weren't clear which one was the real one. However, based on their many years of experience, that green jade sword and that Xianhuan bow and arrow were very likely made by young Master Wu Shuang. Everyone knew young Master Wu Shuang's habits. It was probably related to him as a person. The things he made would also emit a fragile sense of beauty. From the appearance, these 2 armaments were actually in line with young Master Wu Shuang's style. It was very obvious that that genius young girl Helian Jiaoer was already close to the answer. Now it was time to see which one she would choose. Compared to the Xianhuan bow and arrow, the green jade sword was clearly sharper. Especially its sword hilt. It was made very delicately and even faintly emitted a jade color. Just as the judges were whispering to each other, the Helian Jiaoer had already picked up an armament. It was the green jade sword. Everyone was in an uproar, as if the Helian Jiaoer had already won. However, the armament she picked was indeed good. No matter if it was the workmanship or the martial chi induction, it was top-notch. Even He Zhe exposed a regretful expression. Wei Wei had made her move too late. This time she was afraid that she was going to lose. When Helian Jiaoer picked up the green jade long sword, Hellion Vivian had just picked up the first armament to examine. Seeing this, Hellion Jiaoer sneered and glanced at Hellion Vivian proudly, then returned to her seat. Most of the contestants were almost done with the rest of the armaments, but they were not as fast as the Hellion Jiaoer. However, what made them rejoice was that Wei Wei was at the bottom of the pile. That's why even if there were some people among them who didn't really understand armaments, they also weren't afraid. When they passed by Hellion Vivian, their eyes were filled with schadenfreude. However, Hellion Vivian didn't even raise her head. Instead, she exerted force with her slender fingers. Slap. Slap. The inspection of the first armament had been completed. Pa. Pa. The inspection of the second armament was complete. Her speed was very fast. Indeed, there was order in the chaos. Her slender fingers pushed and closed. Her movements were as if she had gone through professional training, pleasing to the eye. From the moment she picked up the armament, placed it on its side, and then pushed the blade out and closed it again, she had only used a few seconds to do all this. In a split second, everyone was stunned, so much so that they couldn't believe it. Their mouths opened into a big O shape. By the time everyone regained their senses, Hellion Vivian had already started inspecting the 10th armament. She leaned sideways and stuck her face to the armament. Neat and handsome. What's the matter with this trash? Is she on steroids? How can she finish so quickly? I just spent a lot of effort to finish inspecting the first few armaments. Look at the way she's holding the armaments. It seems different from us. Of course it's different. How could an ace agent from the 21st century hold a weapon like a normal person? To Hellion Vivian, the first thing she did after waking up was to take out her gun, dismantle it and reassemble it. Not to mention when she was carrying out a mission, she had to change weapons while evading gunfire. Just inspecting 10 or so armaments took up a lot of time. When she was bored in class, she would fiddle around with the armaments and look for opportunities to avoid the teacher. She had long practiced her skills to perfection. If she couldn't even handle this little thing, how could she be the boss of her own armaments shop? Bang! When Hellion Vivian put down the last armament, the faces of those people who were far behind her changed. They had really never seen such a fast person. How long had it been? And she had already finished inspecting all the armaments. Did she even need to look? She just used her hands to move them back and forth? Even if it was an inspection, the competitors couldn't help but stop their movements and stare blankly at Hellion Vivian. Not to mention that the competitors were shocked. Even the armaments masters sitting on the judging panel were also seeing someone inspect armaments like this for the first time. After all, to see if an armament was good or bad, one had to observe many things to make a comprehensive judgment. Someone like Hellion Vivian was really rare. Young master, look at this. One of the judges looked towards Jing Wushuang. Jing Wushuang grasped the teacup in her hand. The water in the cup rippled as she gently said 2 words, very fast. It really is very fast. Someone continued the conversation, however. It's easy to make mistakes when inspecting armaments like this. Being too fast isn't necessarily a good thing. You'll often miss a lot of details. Yuan Ming also knew this logic. He raised his eyebrows. Woman, maybe you should inspect it again before making a decision. No need. Hellion Vivian turned her finger and picked up an armament on the table. This is it. Everyone followed her voice and looked over. After seeing the thing in her hand, hissing sounds came from all directions. Just now, seeing how beautiful her movements were, they wondered what kind of armament she would choose. At the very least, it would be a Xianhuan bow and arrow that was on par with the Hellion Jiaoer. They didn't expect that she would actually choose a pitch-black umbrella. The handle of the umbrella wasn't gold or silver, but rather the most ordinary black. From afar, it even had a kind of worn-out feeling. First of all, the appearance of this armament was already very degrading. It didn't look like a top-notch armament at all. In addition, good armaments paid particular attention to attack power. An umbrella? Ha! Did she think she was choosing a daily necklace to use to block the rain? Waves of laughter came from below the stage. The taste of ridicule was very strong. Miss Hellion couldn't choose anything, so she set out from the practical point. However, that umbrella's color actually matches Miss Hellion's face. It's the same black color, ha ha. Hellion Jiaoer also almost couldn't hold back her laughter. However, she didn't forget that this was in front of people. She did her best to suppress the corners of her mouth and seemed to be very considerate. Big sister, you'd better choose something else. If you choose this umbrella, it'll be a waste of that wonderful performance you put so much effort into just now. Chapter 118. At first glance, Hellion Jower's words sounded as if she was thinking for Hellion Vivian. But in reality, when these words were said in this kind of situation, not only would everyone not sympathize with Hellion Vivian, they would even think that she had just finished inspecting the armament so quickly in order to attract everyone's attention. Sure enough, once Hellion Jower's voice fell, everyone's gaze towards Hellion Vivian immediately became even more disdainful. Some people really know how to act. Isn't that so? These methods one after another. No wonder she could get close to Grandmaster Zizun. She obviously doesn't even know what armaments are. Yet she's still putting on an act to attract the judge's attention. Truly disgusting. Ridicule came one after another. Hellion Jower's pair of eyes slightly drooped, and her red lips curved into a smile. This was exactly the effect she wanted. Even if that slut wouldn't fly into a rage like before, she had already achieved her goal. She just wanted to let that slut, who was an eyesore everywhere, have a taste of being spurned by tens of thousands of people. However, Hellion Vivian's face didn't have the slightest bit of change. She still had a clear and evil smile. Her wide red robes fluttered in the wind, a red that was as red as blood, like a blood lotus amidst this 100 feet of soft red. Then she opened her mouth. Every word was as heavy as 1,000 pieces of gold. The judges haven't announced the answer yet. Aren't you guys a bit too noisy? Hellion Vivian held the umbrella in her hand and placed it on the ground. That calm and unruffled appearance was like that of a queen's, gentlemanly, free and easy. Just by standing there like that, she actually gave people a kind of invisible oppressive feeling. Hearing this, the calm eyes of the man sitting in the private room flashed with a trace of color that was hard to detect. It was impossible to deeply decipher the meaning of this color, but those two sexy thin lips seemed to slightly curve upwards, clearly revealing an evil aura. The red-haired man standing to the side rubbed his beast eyes. Master, just now you smiled? The man didn't speak, only looking at him, slightly narrowing his ink-black eyes. The red-haired man retracted his hand and rubbed his nose, muttering softly, I was wrong, okay? The man retracted his gaze and said in a cold voice, You've lived for too long, so it's inevitable that you're seeing things. You're old, I can understand. Red-haired man. That was why no matter what kind of master one looked for, one shouldn't look for someone with a venomous tongue that would make one gnash their teeth in anger. It was simply infuriating, but he couldn't pay with his life. How was it old? That was right. It had lived for tens of thousands of years, but it was still pursued by many divine beasts. Every time those little divine beasts saw it, they would blush and scold it. It was just too loyal and hadn't considered mating yet, but its master actually called it an old man. Whoosh! Let's see if he looks younger tomorrow. The man's expression did not change as he allowed the mythological beast to scratch the wall behind him. His eyes widened as he looked at the stage again. At this time, all of the competitors had already chosen the martial cultivation they preferred. A total of 18 weapons were held in the palms of the competitors. The elder on the judging panel stood up and said in a loud and clear voice, It seems that everyone is ready. Then let young Master Wuxia reveal the correct answer. We also don't know whose martial cultivation was personally made by him. Young master, please. Jing Wuxia smiled at that elder like warm jade. When he walked, a medicinal fragrance wafted out from his sleeves, making everyone hold their breath. Originally, everyone thought that he was going to stand next to Hellion Jower, because he had already walked there. But no one expected that in the next moment, he would unexpectedly stand in front of Hellion Vivian. The two people's eyes met. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Jing Wuxia smiled and coughed lightly. This young master wants to ask why Miss Hellion chose this one. Hellion Vivian also smiled, but she refused to answer this question. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised with an unspeakable recklessness. The competition doesn't seem to have a rule that the competitors have to say why they chose, no matter if it was the modern era or the ancient era. The only thing that truly determined whether a weapon was good or bad was only one word: murderous aura. Hellion Vivian was someone who was used to touching guns and ammunition. Without the slightest trace of politeness, when a weapon was in front of her, as long as she touched it, she could determine whether or not this weapon had a martial spirit. The martial spirit here didn't mean that the weapon truly had a soul. Rather, it was a bloodthirsty demonic nature. When Hellion Vivian first saw the 18 armaments, her gaze also fell on the green jade longsword that Hellion Jiaoer chose. But when she truly walked into these armaments, she finally knew which one was the best. The green jade longsword, no matter whether it was the martial chi or the connection, was extremely perfect. It could be seen that it came from the hands of a master. But it was too gentle. Perhaps many people thought that young Master Wuxia was truly a person who stood aloof from worldly affairs. After all, every single one of the armaments he made before was like this. But Hellion Vivian didn't think that he was gentle at all. Just based on the fact that he took action to help her escape from Beligaju's pursuit, she could see that he wasn't like the rumors. On the contrary, for a young master who was born in an aristocratic family of armaments, he was always plagued by illness. In the depths of his heart, there must be something hidden. This also meant that his most perfect work absolutely wouldn't be so gentle. Of course, the most important thing was that the umbrella in her hands wasn't a real umbrella at all. When Hellion Vivian thought of this, her thin lips curled up. Her finger slid to an exquisite button, and the corner of her mouth carried a trace of evil. This was the key point. If she didn't guess wrongly, this umbrella should have the same wonderful characteristics as the wings of the night god that she had previously made. Before coming here, Xiao Bai had said that Jing Wuxia had the best armaments in the world in her hands. As for the difference between these materials and other materials, other than Jing Wuxia, no one knew. Perhaps it was hidden in this umbrella. Hellion Vivian once again pushed the umbrella upwards, and when she met Jing Wuxia's slightly sunken eyes, she smiled, completely ignoring the noise around her. Jing Wuxia lightly coughed a few times, and then shook her head, seemingly somewhat helpless. Below the stage, another wave of scolding rose. They didn't think that this woman who didn't know anything would be so arrogant. What's going on? Young master only felt that she was too pitiful and wanted to give her a way out. So he asked her the reason for choosing that umbrella. She really thinks that she's something. Standing beside Hellion Jiaoer, the personal servant girl, disdainfully curled her lips. Hellion Jiaoer narrowed her eyes, but didn't say anything. Her eyes were filled with deep and shallow satisfaction. No matter what that slut did, the person who would win this time would definitely be her. However, Hellion Jiaoer would never have thought that in the next moment, Jing Wuxia would actually pick up the umbrella in Hellion Vivian's hands. Chapter 119. What kind of situation was this? Not to mention the people watching the excitement below the stage, even the judges were dumbfounded. The young master meant to say that the umbrella was made by him. The elder's eyes widened as he asked incredulously, "Young master, this armament was made by me. The rest all came from the hands of masters from various sections." Jing Wuxia lightly coughed, stabilized her breath, and then smiled gently. "Therefore, Miss Hellion Vivian is the winner." Impossible. Everyone started to clamor. How was this possible? How could young Master Wuxia's final product be an umbrella? This made the martial artists who came purely to see the armament thoroughly irritable. What kind of joke was this? How could the Grand Armament Assembly fool people like this? What happened to being an awesome and exceptional martial artist? The elder looked at the red-eyed martial artists below the stage and immediately panicked. He had never encountered this kind of situation before. Originally, he wanted to invite young Master Wuxia over to support the armament assembly. But now, how was this supporting the assembly? This was clearly smashing the assembly. Facing the questioning below the stage, Jing Wuxia didn't say anything. Instead, she took the umbrella from Hellion Vivian's hand and pressed it with the side of her hand. That umbrella actually disappeared. Completely and thoroughly disappeared. Without waiting for everyone to come back to their senses, they only heard a pause sound and that umbrella reappeared. Carrying a faint light, it rotated into a sharp long blade. Everyone looked at this scene dumbstruck. Jing Wuxia's tone was indifferent as she instructed the person behind her, "Uncle Liang, use your 5th level martial qi to attack me." "But young master, your body." Uncle Liang worriedly wrinkled his eyebrows. The young master's body was originally weak, And on top of that, he had rushed for 2 days on the road. He was really afraid that the young master wouldn't be able to take this punch. No problem. Jing Wushuang's expression still didn't change. However, Hellion Vivian could clearly sense the hesitation in his voice. She had more or less heard rumors about Jing Wushuang. It was nothing more than a rich but unfortunate life, and the heavens were jealous of her talents. From the moment he was born, he possessed the most envious talent in martial cultivation. However, due to the limitations of his body, he would never be able to use martial arts. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She walked in front of Jing Wushuang and smiled. "Give me the umbrella. Let Uncle Liang attack me." She had already guessed what this person wanted to prove to everyone. Jing Wushuang's eyes paused. Then he reached out and handed the umbrella over. The man sitting in the private room looked at this scene, and his deep eyes seemed to be imprinted with a touch of coldness. It seemed that he should take some time to tell his prey. He really didn't like it when someone touched what belonged to him. The tip of his tongue swept across his thin lips. The corners of the man's mouth curled up. His long black hair hung down, and there was a kind of evil aura that could move one's soul. The red-haired man's scalp went numb from his smile. He continued to stretch out his claws, scratching the floor. However, he saw Hellion Vivian standing on the stage turn her hand. The black umbrella unexpectedly drew out a silver light that shouldn't appear here. That is? The red-haired man raised his eyebrows and concentrated on looking at the thing that came out of the spirit forest. "This is interesting. Uncle Yang, come on." Hellion Weiwei lightly curved her lips into a smile, her hand holding the handle of the umbrella. Uncle Yang didn't hesitate this time. He gathered chi in his palm and struck towards Hellion Vivian's direction, only to hear a pung sound. Hellion Vivian held the umbrella. Her body didn't move at all. All of the attack power was slowly opened up by the umbrella's invisible barrier, and heavily rebounded back. Everyone was stunned, and they all sucked in a deep breath. Surprise screams swept through the entire venue. Awesome! If I could have this kind of armament, I would be invincible under the heavens. As expected of young Master Peerless, too awesome. Praises came like a tide, but no one knew that at this moment, even Jing Wushuang's heart was filled with a trace of astonishment. When he made the 1000-chance umbrella, he only made it have a defensive ability. It couldn't reflect attacks. But now, Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes and looked at the young girl who was still smiling faintly. He seemed to have understood something all of a sudden, and his pupils constricted. It's her. It's her who changed the 1000-chance umbrella's martial nature. On top of the foundation of defense, she added an anti-attack ability. And the 1000-chance umbrella was actually willing to change. That meant that the 1000-chance umbrella had already begun to recognize an owner. Jing Wushuang's clenched hand slowly loosened. Her eyes were calm. Was this Hellion Vivian really that famous trash in Beijing? Her ability wasn't just this little bit. To be able to grasp the 1000-chance umbrella's abilities so quickly, not only did she need to be familiar with martial arts, she also needed to have unfathomable martial chi. And according to legend, these were all things that Hellion Vivian shouldn't have. It's really a good item. Hellion Vivian put away the umbrella. That umbrella seemed to be responding to her, emitting a faint light. Good girl. Hellion Vivian smiled. I should return you to your owner. Jing Wushuang looked at her and recovered her usual elegance. Its current owner is you. You won this martial arts competition. This time the venue was especially quiet. No one said anything because the truth was right there. Hellion Vivian really did choose the most stunning martial arts in this venue. And the Hellion Jiaoer that they looked forward to the most actually lost. At that moment, Hellion Jiaoer's face became extremely unsightly. She couldn't bear it and tightly clenched her hands under her long sleeves, but she had no choice but to force a smile and wait for the end of the competition. Hellion Vivian's victory was like a slap to her face. How could that slut have such good luck? The aristocratic young masters who lost a large amount of money were also somewhat surprised. They turned their heads and looked at Murong Changfeng sitting next to them. Lord, when did this woman learn how to play with martial arts? You didn't even know? It was just a moment of luck. Murong Changfeng's eyes sunk, slowly clenching his hands. Of course he didn't know. If he knew, maybe he... There was no maybe. Just like what he said, it was just a moment of luck. Murong Changfeng looked below the stage. His lower jaw was very tight. Those young masters also didn't have the mood to think about whether or not Hellion Vivian was just a moment of luck. They only knew that this time they lost miserably. Sigh. On the other side, in a delicately decorated private room, the red-haired man looked at his master, who suddenly put down his teacup and suspiciously raised his eyebrows. "Master, we're not going to watch until the end?" The man didn't answer his question. Instead, he slowly curved his lips into a bewitching smile, giving people a faint feeling of black-bellied. "It's time to close the net." "Close what net?" The red-haired man still hadn't reacted from the scene just now. The man unhurriedly straightened his sleeves, pausing after each word. "A net to catch foxes." After he finished speaking, the man stood up. Wearing a white fur cloak, the sleeves slightly fluttered, extremely cold. Within 100 meters, no one dared to approach half a step. With this kind of celestial charm, if it wasn't the current third Prince Beligaju, who else could it be? Chapter 120. There were still some people who didn't want to believe this result, especially the contestants. If they lost to Hellion Jiaoer, it would at least be easier for them to accept. Losing to a trash without chi. Just thinking about it made them feel very uncomfortable. Wei Wei didn't care whether or not they would be comfortable. The corners of her mouth carried an indifferent smile. She didn't pay attention to those gazes that were looking at her. She tidied up a bit, put away the treasured 1,000 chance umbrella that she just obtained. She eagerly changed her clothes and dressed up properly. She planned to go to the gambling house to collect money. What could be more pleasurable than winning a competition and earning money at the same time? Hellion Wei Wei whistled merrily as she strolled along. The result? What did you say? 2 million taels? Hellion Vivian looked at the bill in her hand. Her usually indifferent eyes had a slight ripple in them. Someone bet 10,000 taels on me? And it was in gold? Who in the world was so crazy? Didn't they know that she was trash? And they even bet money on her. The person who started the gambling house nodded and shrunk back a little. Yuan Ming loudly laughed. 1 to 10, woman, this time you're in trouble. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and rubbed her chin. She raised her eyebrows and asked the person who started the gambling house, "Who bet on me? Do you still remember?" The person who started the gambling house nodded. "I remember. That person has a head of red hair and is wearing good silk. He's drinking tea on the second floor." Second floor? Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She picked up the umbrella and planned to go upstairs. The person who started the gambling house sighed and said, "Boss, are you really planning on giving all this money to that person? How is that possible?" Hellion Vivian looked at him with astonishment. "Where did you get that misconception from?" The person who started the gambling house said, "Then what are you going to do? Walk right into a trap. Go to bargain." Hellion Vivian curved her lips into a smile, overflowing with a trace of wickedness. The second floor of the Phoenix building was called Heaven. It was a first-class private room. Those who could stay here for an hour were either rich or noble young masters in the capital. According to the waiter, that person had been sitting in the private room for 4 hours, and the things he ordered were the most expensive in the building. It seemed that the other party had a powerful background. However, Hellion Vivian really couldn't think of anyone in Armament City, other than those 2 people she was collaborating with, who had such a large amount of financial resources. Hellion Wei Wei looked at the wooden door in front of her and politely knocked on it. Very soon, a deep and magnetic voice came from inside. It was a little unclear because of the wooden door. "Come in." It was just a single word, but it was like the clang of a fine sword being unsheathed. It had a metallic texture, and it subconsciously made people submit. Hellion Vivian thought to herself, this person must be very good at giving orders. Later, when it's time to haggle, I must use all my strength and directly KO the other party. It had to be said that dreams were plentiful, but reality was bony. When Hellion Vivian confidently pushed open the wooden door, the person half leaning on the carved wooden couch just happened to raise his eyes. He absent-mindedly switched hands. His black hair was like ink, and his white clothes were like snow. His slender fingers rested on top of the light cyan enamel tea lid. Taking advantage of the smoke from the tea rising in spirals, He faintly looked at Hellion Vivian through the hazy fog. Hellion Vivian's entire scalp went numb. It was as if she had suddenly fallen into a 10,000-year-old ice cellar. In a flash she froze. Why was he here? Right now the situation was so chaotic. All the people from the large clans were still restless and wanted to get rid of the imperial family at all times. It was fine if he stayed in the capital, but running to Armament City without warning, wasn't he afraid of being assassinated? Wait a minute. He couldn't have come specifically to catch her, right? However, there wasn't anything to worry about. In any case, she had already changed her disguise. Even if the third prince was extraordinarily resourceful, he still wouldn't be able to recognize her at first glance. Hellion Vivian thought in her heart that as long as her disguise was perfect enough, he wouldn't do anything to a strange man. It seemed that her arrival disturbed his rest. His entire person seemed to have been born from ice and snow, noble and flawless. Carrying an ascetic charm, there wasn't a trace of emotion leaking out. He looked at her with a deep gaze, making one unable to guess whether he was happy or angry. Come here. Hellion Vivian looked at him, puzzled. She, who had recovered her true appearance, looked at him with eyes that could speak, making one's heart itch. Beligaju swept a glance at the closed door. He controlled his temper and said again, "Come here." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. How could the third prince use this kind of tone to speak to a man? How should she say? It was strange. Could it be that it was as she had guessed, that he was a homosexual? The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more likely it was. She smiled and said, "I think your distinguished self has misunderstood my identity. I am the boss of this gambling house, not some small boy." Small boy? Firechilan, who was hiding in the mysterious spatial space, was puzzled. Why did this woman suddenly mention a small boy? Could it be that she didn't recognize Master? That was impossible. Hadn't they only not met for 2 days? Oh, it knew because she had changed her disguise. Did she think that she could fool Master with this disguise? She was really naive. When they were in the mysterious forest, Master had already exposed her. But what the hell was a small boy? Firechilan's eyebrows wrinkled even more. Even Beligaju raised his eyes and looked at Hellion Vivian. From this calm reaction, the other party shouldn't have recognized her. Otherwise, with the third prince's temperament, when he saw her, he would have rushed over and used his freezing skill to kill her. But now, he had merely glanced at her once more, and there was even a faint smile in his eyes. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and hid the smile on her face, showing her respect. She couldn't treat the third prince with the same attitude as before. When doing business, she had to act like a business. Bailey Jiaju looked at her extremely well-behaved and distant expression. His eyes suddenly sank, and the coldness in his pupils also quickly spread. The hand that was holding the teacup followed and tightened. He used a lot of strength and almost crushed the porcelain cup into pieces. Hellion Vivian saw that the other party didn't speak and thought that she didn't explain in detail, so she directly said, "If your distinguished self can lower the stakes a bit, I can help you find a few small boys to serve you." Hearing this, Firechilan sucked in a breath of air. This woman meant to say, "Master, he." Firechilan swallowed his saliva and didn't dare to look at his master's cold face. He was sure that this woman was dead for sure. How about it? Hellion Vivian felt that she was already very sincere. She looked at Beligaju with a smile that said, "I understand you very well." The man also smiled. His pleasant voice carried a bewitching chill. "That's a good idea. It sounds very tempting, but..." As Beligaju spoke, he slowly walked towards Hellion Vivian. His heavy eyes forced her into a corner. Chapter 121. The beautiful young man provocatively raised his chin, his delicate face showing no intention. "This partner of mine can only be ordered around by me. Royal brother seems to have forgotten this isn't the capital but Armament City. However, it doesn't matter. I'm very much looking forward to Royal brother's arrival." Beligaju didn't speak. All of his emotions were concealed under that exquisite and luxurious silver mask. Although Hellion Vivian very much wanted the young man to remove that arm of his. But after that scene just now, Hellion Vivian had a deeper understanding of Beligaju's danger. It was very clear that the current her, no matter whether it was martial chi or attack power, was inferior to him by a large margin. Someone as smart as him, if she revealed even a little bit of herself, Baligaju might suspect her. At that time she wouldn't be as lucky as when she was in the capital. A Baligaju without martial chi was already frightening enough. If he recovered now, then he would truly be unfathomable. Therefore, Hellion Vivian felt that it was better for her not to try to break a stone with an egg. Cooperating with the young man's act, at least she wouldn't be caught immediately. Just as she was thinking, Hellion Vivian suddenly felt her shoulder lighten. Puzzled, she slightly raised her eyes and unexpectedly discovered that Baligaju was holding that beautiful young man's arm, his deep eyes looking deeply at her, brimming with ice-cold danger. The always indifferent Hellion Vivian, under that kind of gaze, unexpectedly had some indescribable feelings. Perhaps it was because she was pretending right now, so she had a bit of a guilty conscience. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes, unable to see his face, only his feet. It was obviously the same person from before. But the current him seemed to be emitting a kind of invisible pressure, pressuring her until she couldn't breathe. Suddenly, he directly shook off that young man's arm and reached out to pull her over. Pa! Only the sound of the door opening was heard. It seemed that the entire inn followed along and started to tremble. Baligaju didn't care at all about the young man behind him, taking the drunk Weiwei and walking out of the room. The pretty boy wanted to chase after them, but he was firmly bound in place by a red light. Fire Qilin? The beautiful young man looked at the faintly discernible red-haired man, and his eyes suddenly shook. You're back? Does that mean that his martial chi has completely recovered? The Fire Qilin didn't say anything. Sometimes it was as cold as its master. In any case, its current mission was to trap young Master Han, so that he would not go and cause trouble for its master. It did not need to care about anything else. However, what it didn't expect was that the beautiful young man laughed evilly. Do you think that by trapping me your master won't be in danger? It's exactly the opposite. Think about it carefully. Even I can get the news and know that Imperial Brother has come to Armament City, let alone those old fogies from the 4 great clans. If I were you, I'd rush out right now and not stand here wasting time. Imperial Brother should have just recovered his martial chi, right? Are you sure he's fine by himself? The Fire Qilin's eyes darkened as it suddenly thought of something. Just as it was about to fly out, it realized that its master had just given it an order that it must carry out. The so-called order that must be carried out meant that no matter what happened, it had to carry out the order to the end. In other words, it simply couldn't leave this place even half a step. But master, the Fire Qilin clenched its fists and looked outside the inn, but not even half a shadow could be seen. It was raining. The raindrops followed the tiles and dripped onto the bluestone path. Patter patter, Baligaju stood in the rain. His clean clothes not the slightest bit messy. Under the silver mask, layers and layers of cold mist rose up like the night sky. Just like that, he directly pulled Hellion Vivian, walked into a deep alley where there was no one, and suddenly pressed her against the wall. Hellion Vivian was forced to raise her head, her gaze faintly meeting the man's thin lips. Dazzling and bright. The corner of the man's lips before her eyes still had traces of the bright red blood that she had just bitten. His scattered black hair was wet from the raindrops, faintly revealing an icy chill. His gaze was as usual fierce, domineering, indifferent, arrogant, and even a few emotions that couldn't be seen through. At this moment, Baligaju's aura was no longer gentle, but contained a hint of coldness. He was an intelligent and noble person, the way his eyebrows were knitted, and his lips were pursed in silence, just like the ancient era's imperial family. Although he did indeed inherit this noble bloodline. But, behind his smile how cunning and sinister, was he the only one who held supremacy? Hellion Vivian was startled. The silver knife under her long sleeve was just about to strike, but she was shocked by the words he spat out, standing in place. Do you still want to pretend? He leaned his body, his thin lips just happened to be right next to her ear, those low words. Every single word was transmitted into her ears without missing a single word. Hellion Vivian suddenly froze. He already knew it was her? But that didn't make sense. She even disguised her body. How did he recognize her? Was he tricking her again? This Highness told you to wait for me, to properly settle our debts, but you ran away. Hey, you should know that if this highness catches you, I definitely won't let you go easily. Beligaju's bewitching cold voice sounded again. Hellion Vivian was sure that the other party recognized her this time. It didn't matter how he recognized her. But, he wouldn't let her go easily? She just didn't cooperate with his act. He was chasing her like this and just now he was playing with her like that. Thinking of this, no matter how calm Hellion Vivian was, she couldn't help but say, "So that's why you treated me like that just now? Royal, you should have played enough." Played? Beligaju's eyes darkened. Did she think that he was playing? The fingers hidden under the long sleeves slowly tightened, like the tusks of ancient times, carrying a slight hint of anger. How many times was this, again and again, showing mercy to her? But what about her? She actually had her arms around another man's shoulders. His blood-red eyes burned with flames of anger. He forcefully pinched her chin and said in a cold voice, "What if this highness still hasn't played enough? It doesn't matter if you haven't played enough, this game ends here." Hellion Vivian admitted that she couldn't out-scheme him. "If you want to kill me, then do as you please. In your heart, this highness is such a cruel person?" Beligaju slightly turned his eyes to look at her, the corners of his lips slightly raised. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What else could it be? He spent so much effort to catch her, wasn't it just to teach her a lesson? Beligaju suddenly chuckled. In addition to the usual coldness, there was also an extremely oppressive danger, as if he had broken out from the depths of hell. This highness sometimes really wants to break your arms and legs and tie them to the door. You should know that disobedient prey should be more obedient without its claws. Chapter 122. Beligaju hated Hellion Vivian to the bone, but when he saw her, he felt that it was better to let her be alive and kicking. Before this, Beligaju also didn't feel that Hellion Vivian was anything special to him. She was merely a prey that he caught on a whim. Only this prey was too disobedient. He had no choice but to catch her himself. As a result, before he even reached Armament City, she already had a partner. She even showed her true face to the other party. Right now, Beligaju only felt that he wanted to smear this little face in front of him, and make her obediently stay by his side. No matter what method he had to use. Beligaju's deep pair of phoenix eyes were like ancient pawns. Hellion Vivian heard this and her eyes tightened. He still said that he wasn't cruel. This was even more perverted than killing her or cutting her flesh. However, this lord has already chosen you to be this lord's princess consort. Beligaju looked at her and suddenly changed the topic. His tone was indifferent as he continued to say, "This lord doesn't have a hobby of killing my own princess consort." Princess consort? Hellion Vivian frowned. What was he thinking? Could it be that he really wanted to choose her to be his princess consort? She definitely wouldn't think that this black-bellied and fickle man would only want her. No one could say that they hadn't played enough one second and then say she's his princess consort the next. Unless, retired emperor is pressuring you very much? Hellion Vivian thought of the current situation. The emperor was muddle-headed all day long. Even if retired emperor was powerful, he was already old. Now that the 4 great clans were pressuring him, he wasn't young anymore. If he didn't get married soon, perhaps there would really be some kind of homosexual rumor spreading. At that time, the people of the 4 great clans would have even more reason to not let him inherit the throne. After all, a prince who wouldn't even have an heir was equivalent to a cripple. That's why retired emperor was so anxious to let him choose a princess consort. And he himself also wouldn't be unaware of this point. When Hellion Vivian thought of this, her eyes drooped slightly. She looked lazy, as if even the iciness that she had just emitted gave people a hazy illusion. In modern times, she had disguised herself and infiltrated the mafia. She had used this trick to deceive countless big shots. But Bailey Jiaju didn't fall for her trick. His black and white eyes looked at her meaningfully, giving people a kind of invisible pressure. Hellion Vivian truly felt that chatting with the third prince was more tiring than discussing several business deals. However, as long as he understood what the other party wanted, he would be able to do it. Only then could they cooperate. That's right, it was cooperation. From the very beginning, Hellion Vivian didn't want to be enemies with this man. If she had a choice, she wouldn't have angered him. After all, in the Dragon War Empire, relationships were inextricably linked. The third prince was definitely a man who could not be underestimated. She needed to form an alliance with people. And he obviously needed a princess consort. Hellion Vivian raised her head. When she looked at Beligaju again, her eyes were calm. I know that you really need a princess consort right now, and I also have something that I need. Beligaju lowered his eyes. What did she mean by he really needed a princess consort? We can cooperate, Hellion Vivian slowly said. As for retired emperor, I can help you deal with him, and I can also cooperate with you. Cooperate? Beligaju coldly pulled down his thin lips, hinting her to continue. He wanted to hear what she meant by cooperation. Hellion Weiwei saw that he was interested and laughed along with him. Her voice also became more confident. I can marry you, but don't worry, I won't restrict you. You can do whatever you want to do, you don't have to care about me at all. Wait until the retired emperor's side is dealt with. You've also dealt with the 4 great clans and smoothly ascended the throne. Just divorce me and let me leave the palace. At that time, if you really like someone, then marry her. I won't stick to you at all, and won't have any delusions. Hellion Vivian believed that as long as she said so, the other party would definitely agree. After all, Beligaju was only looking for a shield. She just happened to bump into his reverse scale. Hellion Vivian didn't know how she provoked the third prince to see her as an eyesore. However, since she couldn't escape no matter what, she might as well cooperate with him and act out a play. It was better than being like now, where he was looking for trouble everywhere. As long as they agreed on the conditions, it wouldn't affect her at all. Not only that, their goal was the same as the enemy. She wanted to take back what belonged to her, so she had to go against those old fogies from the 4 great clans. And he must hate them to the bone. When the time came, the two of them would work together and do what they needed to do, then go their separate ways. No one would get in the way of the other. How good would that be? Why didn't she think of this point before? The third prince should also be satisfied with this suggestion. Sure enough, as soon as Hellion Weiwei's voice fell, a rather deep and low voice sounded from the other side. It's just that within that voice was brewing a heavy and icy chill. Listening to it, there was actually a bit of coldness. This is really a good suggestion. These few words were said very casually by Beligaju. The gaze that he looked at Hellion Vivian was also lazy and indifferent. However, his long and slender fingers, which were hidden under his robes, slightly clenched together. You even solved the thing that this highness is most worried about. Not sticking to this highness, ha? Hellion Vivian's thin lips raised. What the third prince should be afraid of is that there is a woman sticking to you. This highness didn't know that you would understand this highness so well. Beligaju said word by word, his fingertips almost sinking into his palms. This damned woman really knew how to provoke him. Should he praise her for being smart, or should he just strangle her to death, so that she wouldn't say another word and make him angry? Hellion Vivian had a comforting expression and patted Bailey Jiajia's shoulder. I also understand the feeling of being forced to marry. Although she was a special agent in modern times, it was inevitable that her subordinates would hurry to get married. You are so sincere that this highness would feel a pity if he didn't agree. Suddenly, Beligaju laughed and lowered his body little by little. Since we want to cooperate, this highness also has a condition. Hellion Vivian was stunned. She thought that what she said was what he wanted. Could it be that there was something that she didn't think of? Stay away from other people. Beligaju's voice was faint, as if he was just stating a fact. This highness doesn't like to see this highness's princess pulling and pulling other people. It has a bad influence. This was easy. Hellion Vivian also understood. If she really became the third princess, she would definitely be targeted by many people and find fault with her. In ancient times, reputation was very important, so it was normal for him to make such a request. Okay, I will remember. Hellion Vivian smiled gently. I also have a condition. Beligaju coldly pulled down his thin lips. This little fox really didn't eat a loss at all. Speak. Chapter 123. Hellion Vivian's thin lips were half-hooked. If your highness has someone you like, just tell me. I can give up my position at any time. Don't hide it from me. Cooperation was cooperation. She didn't want to be someone else's third party and block arrows for others. Give up my position at any time. Baligaju's eyes were cold to the extreme. The side of his face with the silver mask didn't show the slightest bit of happiness or anger. His slender fingers hanging under his sleeves tightened little by little. The black jade thumb ring that was almost crushed revealed his current mood. "You are very magnanimous." Hellion Vivian was stunned and then said with a smile, "Your Highness will meet someone you like one day. At that time your Highness doesn't need to be embarrassed. Just tell me." Moreover, who didn't want to hold the world with the person they liked? At that time, with the throne in his hand, he shouldn't need her anymore. There were countless beauties in the harem, plus the harem girls that were sent into the palace. There would be one that he liked. She didn't want to rely on the position of princess and compete with those women for the position of empress. That would make her become unbearably fierce. Not to mention that her ambition wasn't here. She wanted to conquer the stars and the sea. How could she be trapped by a small palace? With so many women trying to win the favor of a man who didn't love her, she felt tired just thinking about it. "You're really thoughtful." Baligaju looked at her deeply. With a smile that wasn't a smile, there was a bit of ridicule. "Even this king doesn't know when I will meet someone I like. You're really thinking far ahead." Her words were for him, but in fact, this little thing with unsteady claws was just leaving a way out for herself. Again and again, she emphasized that she didn't care if he went to find someone else. At that time, as long as he followed the agreement and let her go, it was fine. Baligaju clenched his hands. He felt like there was a piece of flint pressing down on his chest. It was so heavy that even when he was angry it was a bit painful. In the end, Baligaju gave a deep smile and a trace of coldness flashed through his eyes. Did he marry a princess just to let her go one day? Should he say that her calculations were too good? Or should he say that she was deliberately angering him? One more thing. Hellion Vivian saw the smile on his face and thought that he was in a good mood. She hesitated for a while and decided to bring up the last point. Baligaju faintly replied, There's more? He wanted to hear what else she had to say. We can't be husband and wife. Hellion Vivian didn't feel that the third prince was interested in her. But men were animals that thought with the lower half of their bodies. For the sake of insurance, it was better to make things clear first. Hearing this, the black jade ring on Baligaju's thumb completely shattered. Crack! A crisp sound rang out. His voice echoed in the deserted alley. Coupled with the cold raindrops, it was exceptionally ear-piercing. The candlelight in the distance flickered. The rain was bone-chilling, but Baligaju was not aware of it. He didn't even move. He only gracefully stood in the dark, slightly wrinkling his thick eyebrows. After that, he opened his hand and the powder of the ring drifted with the wind into the rain. Then a very light, shallow smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. Like the spring breeze in March, it lightly brushed past, but after brushing past, it was cold. Do you think that I'm such a picky eater? Without being husband and wife, this woman didn't want him to touch her that much? Or could it be that she was keeping her virginity for someone? Baligaju lowered those black eyes that were as deep as an ancient pool. His pupils seemed to have precipitated many stormy waves. He thought that after so many years, his ruthlessness had already been polished away. Even his happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy seemed to have become more and more lacking. But as it happened yet, he had encountered such a daring little thing. At first, Hellion Wei Wei thought that she had said something that angered him. Now that she heard what he said, the corners of her mouth twitched. I'm not that bad looking. If she didn't deliberately smear her face, she would still be pretty. Who gave you this kind of wrong impression? Baligaju coldly raised his eyebrows. The light in his eyes that looked at her even carried a little bit of disdain. Hellion Vivian was stunned by his question. This time she really felt that the third prince wouldn't do anything to her. She then said, All right, let's not talk about appearances first. I'm still useful to your highness. I can help your highness block marriage and also block peach blossoms. Hellion Vivian knew that like these second-generation imperial princes, they definitely didn't like other people negotiating conditions with them. Even if she suggested that it was beneficial to him, he would still be somewhat disgusted. Therefore, she had to clearly state all the benefits. Baligaju pulled the corners of his mouth into a smile that wasn't a smile. No matter how you looked at it, it felt somewhat mocking. The more you listen, the better it sounds. Then let's find a time to sign a contract? Hellion Vivian glanced at Beligaju with shining eyes. Beligaju's voice lazily asked, "Do we still need to sign a contract?" "Of course. If I regret it in the future and rely on your highness can announce the contract to the world at any time." Hellion Vivian wanted to leave a secret for herself. This man was so two-faced. If by any chance something happened, she wouldn't be able to react in time. Beligaju deeply looked at her, but didn't say anything. For a moment, Hellion Vivian thought that the other party had seen through her thoughts. She kept feeling like her heart had skipped half a beat. She couldn't be blamed for having this kind of reaction. The third prince was too abnormal. It was as if he could see through people's hearts. "All right." Beligaju actually smiled. He slowly raised his thin lips, bringing out an evil charm that no one could see through. "Announcing to the world is not a bad idea." And he agreed so quickly. Hellion Vivian kept feeling that something was wrong. Wasn't this matter going a bit too smoothly? Beligaju narrowed his eyes. "What? You want to go back on your word? Don't forget, you were the one who proposed to cooperate." "I don't regret it." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She just felt that it was too easy. It was a bit unlike the third prince's style. However, she also didn't understand the third prince's style. Maybe it was because he found her more pleasing to the eye today. "It's best if that's the case." Beligaju's voice was very light. Hellion Vivian shrugged her shoulders. She didn't care. Anyway, based on the current situation, if he agreed, it would be good for her. Not only would she not need to return those few hundred taels of silver, she could also openly return to the academy. There was no need to hide. However, "Why did you give me the flowers at that time?" She had always wanted to ask this question. Could it be that she had offended him in the past? But ever since the general's residence, she clearly hadn't seen him even once. Logically speaking, he should have completely forgotten about her. Why did he suddenly give her the flowers at that time? Chapter 124. What do you think is the reason? Beligaju's fingers stiffened. He looked at her coldly and his tone was as casual as ever. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She asked because she didn't know. "Your brain is either filled with straw or tofu dregs." Beligaju's sarcastic tone had a hint of sexiness. "Of course it's because your skin color is more impressive. Otherwise, what else could it be? Even men are not as dark as you." Hellion Vivian glared. This royal family was too uncute. Didn't she just ask a question? Did he have to attack her personally? After mocking her IQ, he mocked her skin color. Beligaju looked at the small head that hung down. The corner of his mouth couldn't help but raise a touch of demonic coldness. "But it's interesting." "Interesting?" Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Did he think he was choosing a mascot? "Since the method is proposed by you, you have to abide by it." Beligaju's voice sounded again. "I don't like people who don't abide by the rules. After returning to the capital, you have to do your best in the martial chi competition." The old man is still very shrewd. Hellion Vivian smiled softly. "Your Highness, don't worry. Since we are going to cooperate as the third princess consort, I certainly won't embarrass you." "Don't belittle yourself," Beligaju said in a low voice. As the two of them were very close to each other, his breath gently hit the back of her ear, causing her to feel limp and numb. "Just be yourself. There's nothing to be embarrassed about." Hellion Vivian slightly raised her eyes. It was just a few simple words, but there was a strange feeling in her heart. Just be yourself. With this sentence, Hellion Vivian decided to try to peacefully coexist with Beligaju in the future. Anyway, she had a backup plan. When there was no other choice, she would use it. "Do you understand?" Beligaju lowered his eyes to look at her. His thick eyelashes cast a charming shadow. She raised her eyes to look at him, only to see his firm and resolute thin lips, handsome and domineering. "Since you all understand, let's set off now." "So soon?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She hadn't received the money yet. "No, I still have things to do." Beligaju stopped in his tracks. "What is it?" "Some personal matters." Hellion Vivian wasn't willing to reveal all of her details to Beligaju. It wasn't because she wanted to guard against him, but rather from the very beginning, She and Heizei had already discussed it. The matter of them opening a store couldn't be known to anyone. She came to Armament City mainly to meet with Heizei. Even if she wanted to leave, she had to wait until she clearly explained the matter before leaving. Beligaju glanced at her and said faintly, "1 day. I'll only give you 1 day. You also want to stay?" Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. "It's not too safe, right?" Beligaju brushed away the non-existent dust on his body. "There's nothing unsafe about it. But looking at the little tyrant's attitude, it seems that he and your highness have some grudges." Hellion Vivian said it very tactfully. In fact, she really wanted to say that the way he looked at you was simply as if he couldn't wait to slaughter you. Beligaju grunted. "It's a matter of when we were young. I just wanted him to wear a skirt, but he didn't wear it, so I had no choice but to personally put it on him." Hellion Vivian. "Your Highness, can you not speak of such a perverted matter so lightly? Hey, making a man wear a skirt? No wonder when the little tyrant sees you now, he can't wait to chop you to death. Which man would be willing to wear a skirt, hey? What if the little tyrant goes to call for reinforcements?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't think that the little tyrant would be able to take this lying down. Beligaju unhurriedly turned his sleeves and said, "I won't give him that chance." Hellion Vivian felt that the third prince was a little irritable today. She wondered how he would deal with the little tyrant later. In short, she would first mourn for the little tyrant. Bah. In order to quickly finish her business, Hellion Vivian didn't return with Beligaju. However, she wasn't wrong. When Beligaju was facing the beautiful boy, he wasn't that gentle. On the other hand, when the fire Qilin saw that its master had returned, it deeply sighed in relief. The beautiful boy's face was filled with indignation. "Imperial brother, if you have the ability, don't let the fire Qilin trap me. Let's fight one-on-one." "With you." Beligaju opened his eyes and glanced at him. The beautiful boy immediately straightened his small chest and put on a grandpa, "I'm ready to fight at any time." Beligaju coldly continued, "Not interested." The beautiful boy's breath was short, and he began to clench his teeth. "Then let me go. I'm sleepy. Tonight you will sleep here." Beligaju supported his chin, as if he didn't see the beautiful boy's eyes that were filled with anger. The beautiful boy sneered. "Are you afraid that I will call for reinforcements? Fine, no matter what, you are still my imperial brother. I will reluctantly let you go this time and sleep here. But don't grind your teeth or snore in the middle of the night. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep." Beligaju frowned. He looked at him as if he was looking at a monster. "Who told you that I will let you sleep on my bed?" The beautiful boy was momentarily confused. "What? Sleep on the floor?" After lightly throwing down these 3 words, Beligaju immediately turned around and walked towards the direction of the bed. The beautiful boy looked at that cold and lonely figure, and his face wrinkled like a bun. Why did he feel that he was played by his imperial brother? Why? Could it be? The beautiful boy seemed to have figured something out, and his eyes suddenly brightened. "Imperial brother should care a lot about my partner, right?" Beligaju's hand that was unbuttoning his clothes slightly paused, but from the beautiful boy's angle, he couldn't see anything. The beautiful boy saw that he didn't respond, and prepared to use ruthless medicine. "But I heard that my partner doesn't like imperial brother." In order to refuse imperial brother's concubine selection, she fled to Armament City. Beligaju still didn't pay attention to him. He reached out and casually threw his clothes on the wooden chair, and unhurriedly picked up the porcelain cup that was placed on the wooden table. The beautiful boy frowned. Could it be that he guessed wrong? Imperial brother didn't have any special feelings towards that Hellion Vivian? Was it purely because Hellion Vivian annoyed him, that's why he took her out like just now? The beautiful boy didn't give up. He didn't believe that he couldn't anger him. His bright eyes turned, and the beautiful boy continued to speak. "I really didn't expect that there would be a day when imperial brother would be rejected by someone. But thinking about it carefully, it's also reasonable. After all, once a woman has a sweetheart, no matter how perfect a man is standing in front of her, she won't be moved. Imperial brother shouldn't know that between my partner and the Hei family's second young master, there isn't only that little bit of relationship in the academy. Chapter 125. Bailey Jiaju seemed to finally have the time to pay attention to him. Wearing only a pure white inner garment, his tall and slender body stood tall and straight. He slowly turned his head around and faced the beautiful young man and raised his eyebrows. The beautiful youth's eyes lit up. Seeing that he had a reaction, he wanted to continue saying something, only to hear that bewitchingly cold and indifferent voice, with a never-before-seen coldness, ring out from the room, "Qilin, here." In midair a figure flashed by. The man's evil smile matched with his long red hair, standing under the moonlight, giving people a mysterious and wonderful handsomeness. Let him be quiet for a while. Baligaju's voice did not have any warmth, so much so that the emotions he expressed could not be heard. However, it made the beautiful youth's expression suddenly change. "You can't play like this. You can't beat him in words, so you sent the fire, Qilin. Brother Emperor, if you have the ability, don't use your divine beast." Baligaju paused and turned his head to look at him. "You mean you want me to do it myself?" "Of course. What kind of ability is using a divine beast?" The beautiful youth proudly raised his face, his delicate chin showing a lazy sharpness. "Heh." Baligaju gave a low laugh, and casually put the thing in his hand to the side. The fire Qilin began to look at the sky at a 45-degree angle. This young Master Han usually looked quite astute. Why was his brain so stupid at such a crucial moment? If it were to make a move, it would at most knock him out. However, if it was His Highness who made a move, the fire Qilin silently shuddered. "Wait a minute. Why did you take off my shoes?" The beautiful youth's frightened voice rang out. "Brother Emperor, you can't really be interested in men, right? What I like is women. Baligaju lazily glanced at him, pinching a foot-binding cloth with one finger. His long eyebrows slightly wrinkled. "I haven't seen you for a few years. Why do you talk so much?" "Oh." The beautiful youth's eyes suddenly shook, and he did not have the chance to continue speaking, because the man reached out and stuffed the foot-binding cloth into his mouth. The beautiful young man sniffed the incomparably sour smell, and his entire handsome face turned into a tragic vegetable color. The fire Qilin's stomach clenched as it watched from the side. Seeing young Master Han's current situation, it recalled the scene of its master making it eat every day for 3 consecutive months. That feeling, now that the fire Qilin thought about it, it felt like it didn't want to live that kind of life anymore. It shook its head crazily. It thought that if it was young Master Han, it probably wouldn't think of wearing a foot-binding cloth for a few days. That was why it was said that no matter who one offended, one should never offend their master. He was simply going against the devil. Woo. The pretty boy finally regained his senses from the blow just now. His first reaction was to start cursing. Fire Qilin patted his shoulder comfortingly and asked tentatively, "Do you want me to knock you out?" "Oh." He hadn't cursed enough yet. "No one can stop me." The fire Qilin shrugged, pinched its nose and said, "All right, then I'll be leaving as well. Young Master Han, you can take your time smelling." "Oh, wait a minute. I was being reserved just now. Don't you know how to be reserved? Hurry up and take this stinky thing out of my mouth." Blarg. He was simply about to vomit from the smell. The pretty boy looked at the closed door, and completely wanted to cry but had no tears. When Baligaju walked into the room, the fire Qilin also followed and immediately prepared a towel. Baligaju silently took the towel and wiped his fingers absent-mindedly, the light in his eyes somewhat dim. The fire Qilin raised its head and glanced at the side of its master's face. It discovered that the man's sparkling handsome side profile had thin lips tightly pressed into a straight line. The fire Qilin was frightened by Baligaju's expression, and its heart trembled. It had followed its master for so many years, and could already roughly judge his mood from Baligaju's expression and actions. When he sneered, it was most likely when his mood wasn't very good. But just now, its master had clearly taught young Master Han a lesson, so how could he still be in a bad mood? Although the fire Qilin had doubts, it didn't ask. It only rubbed its nose and said, "Master, just now, young Master Han brought a piece of news. The people from the 4 great clans have already arrived. Should we return to the capital first?" Baligaju didn't make a sound, and the room seemed to be even quieter. The fire Qilin lightly swallowed its saliva. It was almost certain now that its master's mood was really very bad. Baligaju's temperament was originally on the cold side, And now there was an additional kind of icy aura on his body that made it difficult for people to approach. It was mixed with a sense of oppression that spread from his eyes, causing the atmosphere in the entire room to become both oppressive and cold. He poured himself a cup of sake, and leisurely swirled it. His black hair that was previously wet from the rain was like an incomparably deep night. The more the fire Qilin looked, the more nervous it became, because it had a feeling that its master would crush that cup. Suddenly Beligaju's thin lips curled, and slowly spat out a sentence. It seems that this lord's prey still has many things that it hasn't told this lord. A disobedient prey needs to be properly taught a lesson. Pa! That wine cup really did shatter in his hand, and the wine instantly evaporated, filling the surroundings with a wine fragrance that made people dizzy. Master! The fire Qilin cried out in surprise, your hand! Beligaju looked at his cut finger, and didn't care at all. He stuck out the tip of his tongue and lightly licked it. A ray of light flashed through his bewitching deep eyes, and a slight breeze blew past, faintly revealing an icy arrogance. The fire Qilin frowned in confusion. Until now, it still didn't understand why its master suddenly became so unhappy. When they had just entered the inn, he was clearly still lukewarm. Could it be because of that woman called Hellion Vivian? It was possible. After all, what its master hated the most was other people touching his things. It wasn't because he liked these things very much, but because he was obsessed with cleanliness. Not to mention prey, even if it was the clothes he normally wore, he would immediately throw them away if they were a bit dirty. He wouldn't have any attachment to them. If that Hellion Vivian was really like what young Master Han said, and had some kind of relationship with other men, Master should also immediately lose interest in her. The night outside the window was getting darker and darker. In the inn next to the armament competition venue, Hellion Vivian sat opposite Heizei, and put the white cat on the table. There's a change in the plan, I need to go back first. Heizei's domineering and handsome eyebrows rose. You're not afraid that the royal family will catch you? Hellion Vivian's hand that was drinking tea paused, and she only vaguely made an N sound. She didn't tell Heizei about her agreement with the third prince. Heizei suddenly leaned over, his eyes bewitching. As long as you have an engagement, the royal family won't make things difficult for you anymore. How about it, do you want to consider being this young master's wife, N? Chapter 126. I'm not interested in a playboy. Hellion Vivian lightly rotated the teacup in her hand, each word clear. What's more, if you marry me, wouldn't that childhood sweetheart of yours cry until she fainted in the toilet, The smile on Heizei's face instantly became serious. He reached out and drank a mouthful of wine. Her? She's eager for me to get married quickly. The day before yesterday, she even sent a pile of scrolls to my grandfather. She really loves to worry. When Heizei said this sentence, he carried a faint ridicule, as if he didn't put anyone in his eyes. Hellion Vivian actually disagreed. Everyone said that He family's second young master's eyes were high, and that his interest in women would never exceed half a month. But in Hellion Vivian's eyes, that was because he hit someone in his heart. You can leave first. Heizei turned his head, his face clearly defined, his mood flat. You won against young Master Wu Shuang's armament. There's bound to be people who aren't convinced. Staying in Armament City isn't safe. Hellion Vivian thought that this was indeed the case, so she didn't stay any longer. After clearly explaining everything that needed to be explained, she wanted to leave the inn. But she didn't expect to run into Hellion Jiaoer and her group of people. They seemed to have just returned from the armament convention, each of them holding a newly selected armament in their hands. After seeing Hellion Vivian, those people's expressions were all different. Chongfeng, look, that ugly woman also came. She shouldn't have come looking for you, right? Someone laughed out loud. You couldn't blame these people for having this kind of reaction because the previous Hellion Vivian was indeed very infatuated with Murong Chongfeng. Every day, she stayed in the Defense Division residence, thinking that she could find out even a little bit of news about her future husband. This was the idea that every young girl waiting to be married would have, but these people took it as a reason to ridicule Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian coldly laughed. With the white cat lying on her shoulder and an umbrella in her hand, she didn't pay attention to that group of people. When Murong Chongfeng heard someone mention her, The light in his eyes couldn't help but look towards her side. Under his long sleeves, his hands also tightly clenched. Perhaps even he himself didn't know why, but these days Hellion Vivian's face kept flashing in his mind from time to time. He thought it was probably because he was not used to it. After all, no one could get used to a person who was so passionate about them in the past being so cold and indifferent now. Look at the umbrella in her hand. Don't tell me it's the one made by young Master Wuxia. Jealous gazes fell on Hellion Vivian. Among them, there was no lack of young ladies from aristocratic families who adored Murong Changfeng. They also had a good relationship with Hellion Jiaoer, so when they saw Hellion Vivian, they were naturally not pleasing to the eye. On top of that, her father also had a certain status in Armament City, so towards Hellion Vivian, she wasn't that polite. "Hey, we're talking about you. Bring that umbrella of yours over here and let us take a look." However, Hellion Vivian acted as if she didn't hear anything, minding her own business as she walked forward. That young lady from an aristocratic family had never been treated like this before. She walked over in large strides and directly blocked Hellion Vivian's path. Her voice was cold. "This young lady is talking to you. Did you not hear?" Hellion Vivian indifferently glanced at her and only said 2 words. "Get out of the way." "Huh." That young lady found it funny as she tilted her head. "Who do you think you are? You dare to talk to this young lady like this? Just because you were lucky enough to win young Master Wuxuang's armament, you really think you understand armaments very well? Ugly girl, let me tell you, you're still far from it." Hellion Vivian's eyes looked up and met that young lady's eyes. Her thin lips curved, bringing out a severe iciness. "I'll say it again. Get out of the way." That young lady wasn't easy to deal with. Seeing that Hellion Vivian didn't give in to her, her face immediately darkened. "Eldest sister." Hellion Jiaoer stood by that young lady's side and used a look that said, "How could you be so insensible to look at Hellion Vivian? This is the daughter of the Armament Assembly's vice president, Miss Chang. Shouldn't you be a bit more respectful to her?" Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and a mocking smile slowly overflowed from her eyes. That young lady looked at her appearance and was in a bad mood. She sneered. "Forget it. This young lady also won't lower herself to her level. Towards this kind of country bumpkin who hasn't seen many armaments and doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth after occasionally winning one, how much respect do you expect her to have? Little sister Jiaoer, wait until you buy that armament from Profound Heavens. You really should let this country bumpkin see it and let her properly know what is called disparity." After hearing Profound Heavens, the smile at the corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth became even wider. When she raised her eyebrows, it also carried a bit of a unique and unknown flavor. Hellion Jiaoer faintly smiled and hypocritically evaded. "It's just that we're still discussing. Whether or not we can get it is still not certain. However, it seems that there should be a plan." "Little sister Jiaoer, what are you afraid of? The defense division has plenty of money. Moreover, only a good armament can match your innate talent." Chang patted Hellion Jiaoer's hand and disdainfully swept a glance at Hellion Vivian. Unlike some people who curry favor with others everywhere, but don't have the slightest bit of real talent, I reckon that she hasn't even heard of what Profound Heavens is. If I were Grandmaster Zizun, accepting a disciple like this wouldn't be enough to lose face for me. Chang's words caused a burst of laughter from all around. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms in front of her chest, her body leaning against the pillar behind her. How should she tell this Miss Chang that the Profound Heavens that she spoke of was actually opened by her? Well, let's not waste any more time here. Murong Changfeng faintly cast a glance at Hellion Vivian. His handsome face didn't have the slightest trace of change. "You should also return to where you belong." When Chang heard Murong Changfeng help Hellion Vivian out of the predicament, there was a burst of discomfort in her heart. Didn't Murong Changfeng hate this woman the most? What Murong Changfeng said is right. We completely don't need to waste time on a good-for-nothing. Chang deliberately misinterpreted Murong Changfeng's words, smiling appropriately. "I heard that she will also participate in the martial chi competition not long after. At that time we can actually have a good exchange. She must beat this ugly woman until she can't even crawl up." Hellion Vivian didn't respond to her words. People who were familiar with her should know that she was in a hurry. Otherwise, she wouldn't have endured for so long, and would have already sent a fist flying over. However, considering that the third prince was still waiting for her, plus if this matter attracted the attention of the four great clans, it would inevitably cause trouble for the third prince. What she disliked the most was to cause trouble for her own business partners. However, having a good exchange in the martial chi competition actually happened to coincide with her thoughts. Woman, your smile is very evil. Chapter 127. Yuan Ming's lazy voice came out from the fantasy space. Hellion Vivian used her mind to communicate with Yuan Ming. Is that so? Of course it's not like you to hold back like this. Yuan Ming laughed evilly. You shouldn't be planning something, right? Hellion Vivian didn't speak, but the smile on the corner of her mouth revealed her craftiness. However, the young lady named Chang Chang didn't know Hellion Vivian's thoughts and thought that she was afraid of her, so she proudly raised her thin lips. Hellion Jiaoer also felt that she had vented her anger, and her red lips curved up. Sister Chang, let's go up first. The people from profound heaven will be here soon. It's not good to stand here. Sister Jiaoer is so thoughtful. Chang Chang casually retracted his gaze from Hellion Wei Wei's body, as if he was looking down on her. My father will also be here in a while. My father is the kind of person who can't stand people who rely on flattery to climb up the ranks. These days he has been in contact with people from profound heaven. Who knows, maybe he can help Sister Jiaoer. Hellion Jiaoer smiled. Then this younger sister will first thank elder sister. There's no need to thank me between us. Chang Chang intimately used the hand that was holding the handkerchief to pinch Hellion Jiaoer's face. The two people smiled at each other. They were both extremely good-looking beauties. This kind of curved lips and light smile actually had the meaning of captivating the birds and beasts. The people who stayed in the hotel all looked over, and even the eyes of those young masters emitted a faint luster, thinking that if they could marry such a woman, their lives would be complete. In this way, the slightly tanned Hellion Vivian seemed to be somewhat unpresentable. At least in their hearts, she was unpresentable. What they didn't expect was that just after they went to the private room, the person in charge of profound heaven happened to come over. The person in charge was a middle-aged man of average age. He was also Hei's most trusted assistant, Uncle Zhang. When he saw Hellion Vivian standing at the door, his originally lukewarm footsteps suddenly quickened. He walked towards Hellion Vivian, his voice full of surprise. Big boss, why are you here? I'm here to discuss something. Hellion Vivian's voice was indifferent as she looked at the master behind him. Seeing this, Uncle Zhang paused and said, Big boss, this is Master Chang, who is cooperating with us this time. During this period of time, Chang Xiong had been focusing all his attention on the collaboration with Profound Heavens, and didn't look at today's armament test. So he didn't think that it was Hellion Vivian from the capital. However, what made him surprised was that Profound Heaven's boss was actually a young lady. One must know that in the armament world, this Profound Heavens, from the moment it was established, made many armaments that made people endlessly astonish. Almost every piece of armament was crazily fought over by everyone. Many people said that their family's armaments were almost comparable to the armaments personally made by young Master Wu Shuang. Even some highly respected masters couldn't say whether the armaments made by Profound Heavens were better, or the armaments made by young Master Wu Shuang were better. Even this time, young Master Wu Shuang had agreed to participate in the armament conference because he wanted to see who the boss behind Profound Heavens was. But what made people regretful was that she didn't appear. Even her basic information, whether she was a man or a woman, and how old she was, no one knew. However, everyone had always thought that she was a disciple of some famous master. At the very least, she was born in an aristocratic family, like young Master Wu Shuang's successor. But Chang Xiong looked at this person in front of him. He hadn't even seen her in the armament world. Let's not talk about other things first. Could it be that she hadn't even taken the armament master exam? Otherwise, it was impossible that he wouldn't have any impression of this kind of genius, considering that he was the armament judge every year. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of inquiring more about Profound Heaven's boss from Uncle Zhang, but Uncle Zhang's mouth was too tight. It could be seen that Uncle Zhang was born in an aristocratic family's housekeeper. He had a steadiness that ordinary housekeepers didn't have. In addition, there were too many people who wanted to cooperate with Profound Heavens. Uncle Zhang had always been polite to him, but not very enthusiastic. If it wasn't for this young girl's appearance, he wouldn't even see any fluctuation of emotion on Uncle Zhang's face. Boss's surname is Chang? Hellion Vivian faintly smiled and raised her good-looking eyebrows. She meaningfully curved her thin lips. I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. Chang Xiong stuck out his chest. He knew it. It was that Uncle Zhang who didn't understand the rules. At the very least, he was also the vice president that everyone in the armament world knew. Yet he still loved to ignore him. Look at their boss. Her age was a bit young, but she was still quite enthusiastic. However, Uncle Zhang didn't think so. He glanced at Hellion Vivian. Although he hadn't known Big Boss for a long time, he still had a certain understanding of her. He couldn't look at her with the eyes of an ordinary girl. When she truly wanted to discuss business with someone, she absolutely wouldn't smile like this. Her decisiveness in killing and business talk made him, a person who had been in the business world for a long time, endlessly admire her. And her tricks, what were they called? Oh right. Marketing concept. Hungry consumption. Up until now, Uncle Zhang still didn't understand where this phrase came from. However, looking at Big Boss, who started from scratch and caused a sensation in the armament world as soon as she appeared, from ordinary martial artists to martial arts aristocratic families, there wasn't a single person who didn't ask about their armament. He knew that this girl wasn't simple. Therefore, this Chang Xiong seemed to have underestimated his Big Boss a bit. I didn't expect you juniors to have heard of this old man's taboo name. As Chang Xiong spoke, he stroked his own beard. His eyebrows carried a kind of complacency that came from being in a high position for a long time. Hellion Vivian smiled and already pointed out. Vice President Chang did a good job of advertising. Advertising? Chang Xiong puzzledly wrinkled his eyebrows. Why did he feel that he somewhat didn't understand the other's words? Hellion Vivian didn't continue to circle around this issue. Instead, she glanced at Uncle Zhang. Uncle Zhang, I have a few matters that I want to discuss with you alone. Yes. Uncle Zhang strolled over. Hellion Vivian lowered her voice. The more she spoke, the wider the smile at the corners of her mouth became. It was as if a demon had found some fun toy when it was bored. Uncle Zhang's gaze on Chang Xiong paused. He respectfully replied, "Don't worry, Big Boss. I know what I should do. Then I'll leave first." Hellion Vivian lightly smiled and nodded in Chang Xiong's direction. Stroking the white cat, she slowly stepped into the long alley. Yuan Ming's deep and shallow laughter was transmitted over. "Woman, you're simply too bad. Acting like this, wouldn't that Miss Chang and that little sister of yours be stifled to death? Ha!" Chapter 128. What I want is to make their hearts feel stifled. Hellion Weiwei slowly raised her eyes. Her thin lips curled into a smile, as handsome and demonic as the devil's. Phoenix Building Inn, second floor private room. Chang Xiong brought Uncle Zhang upstairs. After seeing that group of people, he faced Murong Changfeng and laughed heartily. "Nephew, you also came. How is it? Is Master Tu Lao doing well recently? Is he still looking for that genius disciple he wants to accept?" "Master's body has always been strong." Murong Changfeng's voice was very dull. "As for other things, I'm not too clear." Chang stood at the side with a red face, interrupting, "Father, it's not like you don't know how busy Murong Changfeng is. Yet you still ask him about these things." Chang Xiong glanced at his own daughter. Regarding her thoughts, he more or less understood. However, even if their Chang family had a place in the world of armaments, wanting to marry into Prince Murong's Murong Manor was also a social climb within social climb. Therefore, he was very happy that his daughter could interact more with Murong Changfeng, so he also didn't teach more. Instead, he continued with the previous topic and directed it towards Uncle Zhang. "This is Uncle Zhang, the manager of Profound Heavens. Their boss is the one who can truly be called amazing. At such a young age, he's already made no less than 10 armaments. If Master Tu Lao saw him, he would definitely change his mind, and no longer look for that whatever genius." Uncle Zhang stood at the side, neither servile nor overbearing, and also had the rules of a manager, not too outstanding but also not too calm. Hearing Uncle Zhang's words, he only smiled calmly. "Uncle Chang has seen Profound Heavens, boss?" Hellion Jiaoer's eyes lit up. It said that this boss' whereabouts were mysterious. extremely difficult to approach. Even his surname and name, no one knew. If she could get through to profound heaven, then in the future she could easily get whatever armament she wanted. Even if that slut obtained an armament made by young Master Wu Shuang, so what? She still couldn't compare to her. The more Helian Jiaoer thought, the deeper the smile on her face. She believed that when the time came with the Defense Division's influence, Profound Heaven's boss wouldn't not give her face. Now she only needed Uncle Cheng to recommend her. The Helian Jiaoer raised her head and looked at Cheng Xiong. Cheng Xiong stroked his beard and laughed. I've seen her. For a girl to have such an achievement, her future will be limitless. A girl? Murong Chongfeng's handsome face finally had some ripples. The hand holding the teacup slightly paused. Profound Heaven's boss is a girl. Not only Murong Chongfeng, but even the rest of the aristocratic family's young masters also showed a very surprised expression. They were not unaware of the influence of Profound Heavens. In their minds, the boss of Profound Heavens must be a very powerful old man, or at the very least a master. However, they did not expect that the boss of Profound Heavens would be a girl. Father, could it be that someone is impersonating him? Cheng Cheng's tone was somewhat sour. Originally, she worshipped the boss of Profound Heavens, just like how she worshipped Master Wu Shuang. However, when she heard that the boss was a girl like herself, there was a very subtle feeling in her heart. Coupled with the fact that Murong Chongfeng's attention was completely attracted, Cheng Cheng was even more uncomfortable, so she had such a prejudiced guess. Uncle Zhang listened and raised an eyebrow. Impersonation? According to what Miss Cheng said, I am also an impersonator? I didn't mean that. Cheng Cheng looked at Uncle Zhang indifferently. She had always looked down on the servants. He was just a housekeeper. No matter how powerful he was still a servant. Why was he so arrogant? Cheng Xiong naturally knew his daughter's personality. He was afraid that she would offend Uncle Zhang, so he quickly reprimanded Cheng Cheng. Sure, don't be unruly. Cheng Cheng stretched her neck and wanted to say something. However, she was slowly interrupted by Uncle Zhang. Our Profound Heavens has always been under the control of my boss. Since Miss Cheng is so suspicious of my boss, then there is no need to discuss the matter of cooperation. Vice President Cheng, I will take my leave first. This. Cheng Xiong didn't expect that the business that he had been talking about for 3 days would be ruined because of 1 or 2 words. Uncle Zhang, Cheng'er is still young. How could she have offended Uncle Zhang? Uncle Zhang, please speak frankly. You can't just not talk about cooperation because of these trivial matters. Uncle Zhang stopped in his tracks and pretended to be humble as he said with a smile, What are you saying, Vice President Cheng? Miss Cheng is the daughter of the Cheng family and I'm just a servant. There's no such thing as offending her. It's just that my boss is a little strange. She loves money, but she will never cooperate with anyone who has offended her. Offend? Cheng Xiong didn't understand and was slightly stunned. When did this old man offend her? He only offended that little girl today. Uncle Zhang didn't speak again. Instead, he looked at Cheng Cheng with a deep meaning and continued to leave. Cheng Cheng was unhappy and rudely stopped him. I want to see if you dare to leave. Uncle Zhang looked up and smiled. Miss Cheng, what are you trying to do? Are you threatening me? She's just the boss of a martial arts firm, yet she's so cocky. Your boss doesn't want to cooperate, right? Then this young lady will properly remove the claws of the dog she's raising and properly beat her. As Cheng Cheng spoke, she wanted to call someone. Uncle Zhang calmly glanced at Cheng Xiong. Vice President Cheng, before our boss left, she wanted me to give you a sentence. Cooperation between martial arts firms is voluntary. This is the rule that President Jing of the Armament Guild personally set. No one is allowed to use force to oppress the weak. Especially as a member of the Armament Guild, you can't abuse your authority even more. Otherwise, you will be forever expelled from the world of martial arts. Vice President Cheng, as the Vice President of the Armament Guild, you shouldn't be unfamiliar with this rule, right? After he finished speaking, Uncle Zhang couldn't help but admire the words that his boss had instructed him to say before she left. It was simply like hitting the nail on the head, pressuring Cheng Xiong, so that not only did he not dare to make things difficult for him, he also had to respectfully send him back. As expected, Cheng Xiong immediately pulled Cheng Cheng back. His face was filled with anger. Nonsense. Daddy. When had Chang Chang ever suffered this kind of suffocation, especially in front of the air? This made her lose even the slightest bit of face. She just wanted to say something again to salvage a bit. Yet Chang Xiong heavily grasped her wrist. "Shut up, your father has truly spoiled you." As he spoke, he glanced at the servant girl standing to the side. "What are you in a daze for? Still not quickly bring the young lady away?" That servant girl answered yes in panic and hurriedly went to pull Chang Chang. "Mississippi, you let go of me." Chang Chang's unconvinced voice became more and more distant. "This young lady actually wants to ask that one surnamed Zhang. How much ability does that boss of his have to not even pay my father's account?" Chapter 129. When Chang Xiong heard this, the fire in his heart burned even more fiercely. Ordinarily, he indeed taught his daughter like this. As the vice president of the Armament Association, having a little privilege was natural and proper. However, that was in private. He didn't want her to shout it out in front of so many people. Chang Xiong seemed to be really angry. He pointed to the imperial bodyguard at the side and said, "Go tell Miss to go out less in the future. If she says one more word, go to the ancestral hall at the back of the mountain." Not knowing if it was because the imperial bodyguard's words had passed on, Chang Cheng's side finally quieted down. Chang Xiong let out a long sigh. He turned his head and said to Uncle Zhang, "This daughter of mine is really too outspoken. Uncle Zhang, you must not take it to heart." "Vice President Chang, I just said that this old servant is only a manager." Uncle Zhang smiled and said, "It's just that our boss still has some words to say to Vice President Chang. It's better to be low-key." The smile at the corner of Chang Xiong's mouth stiffened. He firmly clenched both his hands. This was the first time he was in danger from a little girl whose hair hadn't even fully grown yet. What was even more hateful was that the little girl simply wasn't here. Just by passing on a message, he couldn't even move an inch. Speaking of which, why would that little girl have such a big opinion of his own beloved daughter? Could it be that Chang'er had really offended her? Chang Xiong didn't understand. However, in just a short half an hour, all of his efforts in these past few days had turned into bubbles. Originally, the Chung family hadn't produced any outstanding armament masters these past few years. On the surface, the Chung family still looked the same as before. In the armament world, they had a pivotal position. In reality, only he himself knew that the current Chung family already couldn't be compared to the previous Chung family. And Profound Heaven's momentum was just right. He looked for Profound Heavens precisely because he wanted to borrow the other party's momentum to shake up the Chung family. If Profound Heavens didn't cooperate with him, the Chung family's road would be very difficult to walk. But to have him lower his head to a little girl, he absolutely wouldn't do it. Uncle Zhang also saw through Chang Xiong's thoughts. Early on, the boss didn't agree to cooperate with the Chung family. It was also because he was talkative. He felt that the Chung family was an old name and had absolute influence in the armament world. That's why he repeatedly proposed to the boss to let her reconsider. Now it seems that not only is Chang Xiong unable to teach his own daughter well, even he himself has that kind of superiority feeling that no one is inferior to him. Such a person would not make much of a difference in the business world. Uncle Zhang took the hat and put it on his head. He didn't say another word to Chang Xiong. Just as he walked out of the inn, someone chased after him. "Uncle Zhang, wait." It was the Hellion Jiaoer. She was much smarter than Chang Cheng. At the very least, she didn't show it on her face even though she looked down on these servants. Her shy smile had a hint of gentleness. Uncle Zhang was a very smart person, and had been a retainer of the He family for 2 generations. Although these young ladies in the capital did not know him, he was very familiar with each and every one of them. This was also because the old master had recently made up his mind to marry the second young master. Oh no, he wanted the second young master to marry a wife. He could only say that this Hellion Jiaoer was very good at managing herself. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw him stop, she signaled the maidservant beside her to pass the things in her hands to him. Uncle Zhang didn't need to look at those things to know what they were. He raised his lips and smiled, but didn't accept them. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw that he didn't accept the banknotes, she wrinkled her eyebrows. "Miss, what should we do?" That maidservant had never seen someone who didn't accept money. The Hellion Jiaoer secretly scolded that he didn't know how to appreciate kindness. The corner of her mouth hooked up. Uncle Zhang thinks it's too little? Miss Jiaoer misunderstood this old servant's meaning. Uncle Zhang raised his head. The light in his eyes was not weak. Perhaps Miss Hellion Jiaoer doesn't understand our profound heavens. Almost everyone in the armaments world knows that we, profound heavens, don't accept these. The Hellion Jiaoer squeezed the handkerchief in her hand tightly and said, I also don't have any other meaning. I just want to buy an armament personally made by your boss. Money can be discussed. Uncle Zhang laughed. To be able to make our boss personally make an armament, money is one thing, but also cultivation. You don't have to worry about this. Before the Hellion Jiaoer could speak, the maidservant standing next to her opened her mouth, arrogantly carrying a thick sense of pride. My miss is the successor of the Hellion family, a top student at White Academy, a genius that everyone envies. Not to mention these ordinary people, even the armaments aristocratic families in the capital may not be able to win against my miss. Uncle Zhang glanced at that maidservant and suddenly laughed. I forgot to mention the third point, which is also the point that Profound Heavens just added. What? No matter what you say, my miss can afford it. The maidservant looked at the Hellion Jiaoer's face and saw that her eyes were full of praise. The words that came out of her mouth were even more arrogant. Uncle Zhang's voice was steady as he opened his mouth, pausing after each word. Arrogant and egotistical, we, Profound Heavens, will not sell anything to her. Hearing this, the maidservant's proud mouth suddenly stiffened, and she couldn't help but look towards the Hellion Jiaoer. Sure enough, the Hellion Jiaoer's face was even uglier than her. That small face that was originally pretending to be friendly, at that moment, became incomparably ferocious. It was as if she was trying to hold back the billowing waves of anger. What the hell? The Hellion Jiaoer didn't flare up at the moment. After Uncle Zhang left, she fiercely threw out the handkerchief in her hand. Miss, don't be angry. That maidservant hurriedly said. Master has already contacted the person in charge of Profound Heavens. This steward definitely doesn't know who you are, so he dares to be so rude to you. Wait until we reach the capital, Master will take the armaments back for you. At that time we will let this old thing and that whatever boss take a good look at who they have provoked. The Hellion Jiaoer listened to the maidservant's words and took a deep breath, as if relieved a lot. A group of ignorant country bumpkins. Mrs. Right. At the same time the maidservant nodded fiercely and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately she saved in time. Otherwise, when the Mrs. temper flared up, she wouldn't need to keep her arm. The Hellion Jiaoer tidied up her sleeves. Let's go back and wait until we reach the capital. The people of Profound Heavens had eyes but failed to see. Sooner or later they would regret it. How could they know that the other party wasn't blind, but simply didn't want to sell the armaments to her at all? After a little servant saw Uncle Zhang, he asked, Uncle Zhang, isn't that the second miss of the general's residence? Uncle Zhang glanced at the little servant. Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. The little servant touched the bridge of his nose. I didn't want to ask, I just wanted to ask what she said to you. She looks really beautiful up close. That's still asking. Uncle Zhang's voice was neither slow nor slow. Well, it's about time to go back. Big Boss is also here. She saw Cheng Xiong and was not satisfied with the Cheng family. The little servant's eyes shook. Big Boss? She's here. Where? Chapter 130. She left a long time ago. Uncle Zhang calculated the abacus in his hand. This time, the cost of this trip is not small. Give me all the accounts. The servant's expression was tranquil. I've never seen the Big Boss's appearance. When you first entered Profound Heaven, I already said, don't be curious. Uncle Zhang closed the abacus, as if he had thought of something, turned his head and said, oh, that's right. Pass down the order, just say that the Big Boss said that in the future, if people from the defense division come to buy armaments from us, clearly tell them that they have to pay 10 times the price before we sell them. 10 times. The servant slightly lowered the corners of his eyes. How did the people from the defense division provoke the Big Boss? Not only did they want to earn the other party's money, but they also clearly told the other party. This was simply killing the other party without giving the other party a quick death. After the people from the defense division heard this news, They would certainly be angered to death. Uncle Zhang smiled and shook his head. That's why I said, no matter who you offend, don't offend our family's boss. Even if she was in class, she could still make armaments under the teacher's eyes, not to mention dealing with these young masters and young ladies who smell like milk. A person who only used a month's time to make a name for herself in the world of armaments. Merely relying on how many armaments she made was useless, it also depended on her brain. In the end, it was these people who looked down on his boss. What's more, his boss also had that kind of identity. The capital's outstanding hedonistic young lady. Everyone wanted to come and step on her foot, so much so that even the people from the Hellion family had removed her name from the family. This kind of person, who could have imagined that she would be Profound Heaven's boss, the armaments world's most popular armaments master. After he finished speaking, Uncle Zhang entered the carriage. He didn't know that just after he left, the remaining servant's eyes flashed with a trace of light. Accompanied by bursts of light coughing, that servant slowly walked into the deserted long alley. His slender pale fingers streaked across the side of his face. An inconspicuous thin layer of skin lightly separated from that originally somewhat healthy complexion of his face. In the end, only a sickly handsome paleness was left. Young master. The black-clothed man floated down and kneeled on the ground with one knee. His eyes slightly raised with a loyal and devoted expression. In the future, this kind of thing should be left to this subordinate to do, your body. It's fine. That person lightly coughed twice. His long sleeves fluttered with a faint medicinal fragrance. His voice was as gentle as jade, completely different from before. The moonlight shone on his chiseled face. Who else could it be other than the young master of an aristocratic family, Jing Wuxia? No one knew that the reason he came to Armament City this time, other than to find an owner for that female-specific armament, the more important reason was that he wanted to meet the boss of Profound Heavens, who was rumored to be very popular. In the end, that person's whereabouts were even more secretive than his own. He had no choice but to disguise himself as a servant of Profound Heavens to approach him. However, after waiting for 2 whole days in Armament City, he still didn't see that so-called boss. However, at least there was still something to be gained. Although Uncle Zhang acted cautiously, it was inevitable that he would reveal information about that person during the conversation. For example, even if she is in class, she can still do armaments under the teacher's nose. This meant that the person was not an old master like everyone thought. Instead, he was just a student. And in the Dragon War Empire, there was only one academy located in the capital. That was the White Academy that everyone yearned for. Jing Wuxia lowered his eyes, covering the bits of broken light emitted from inside. He instructed the person on the ground, "Go tell the people at White Academy that I accepted their invitation." Ah! The black-clothed man rarely showed this kind of surprised expression. "Young master, you really want to go to that academy to teach as a teacher?" "Not to teach." Jing Wuxia lightly coughed twice. The smile on the corner of his mouth was still as gentle as jade. "I'm going to be a student." The black-clothed man stared. What? Young master was going to be a student? What kind of joke was this? Even if it was a supreme master's armament, it was not necessarily comparable to young master. If he was going to be a student, who would dare to be his teacher? The black-clothed man had a premonition that in the future, White Academy would no longer have such a peaceful day. Going in like this won't do. I need to disguise myself. Jing Wuxia was very considerate. His fingers supported his forehead and lightly smiled. I don't want to be surrounded by people every day, asking me to help them make armaments. The black-clothed man lowered his eyes. Apart from the Supreme Master, those teachers of White Academy have never seen young master before. You shouldn't be recognized when you go in. There are a few students from White Academy who are participating in the armament meeting this time. Jing Wuxia coughed. His pair of extremely gentle and elegant eyes were like an ink painting. The person who won his armament was one of them. The black-clothed man's eyebrows slightly drooped. Young master, don't worry. I'll greet the 3 students who are present today. Apart from that Hellion Vivian, whom master is not familiar with, the other 2 people won't reveal young master's identity. She also won't. Jing Wuxia's tone was indifferent as he withdrew his gaze. The black-clothed man was astonished. How did young master know? She's not that kind of person who likes trouble. Jing Wushuang coughed twice as if he had thought of something. The rare corners of his mouth unexpectedly revealed a faint arc. It was the kind of genuine smile that was different from the one in front of people. The black-clothed man looked somewhat dumbfounded. What kind of situation was this? Shouldn't he ask Uncle Yang what had happened these 2 days when he wasn't here? Young master actually spoke up for that famous hedonistic young lady in the capital? This was a bit too strange. Let's go. Jing Wushuang turned around. His sickly handsome appearance made him look like a gentle jade young master in an ancient painting scroll. He was neither anxious nor impatient. Tidy up and prepare to enter the academy in a few days. The black-clothed man lowered his head and appeared very respectful. Yes. However, what else is there? Jing Wushuang saw that he wanted to say something but hesitated. He looked towards the black-clothed man's direction. The black-clothed man lowered his head even more. When this subordinate entered the city, I discovered quite a few experts. They all seem to have come from the capital. They should be the 4 great clans' death warriors. Only, this subordinate doesn't understand why they came to Armament City. Jing Wushuang's fingers paused. He lifted his eyes and looked towards the bright crescent moon. This capital's sky is about to change. Some people can't hold themselves back. Young master's meaning is that their target is the 3rd prince? The black-clothed man was so shocked that his eyelids jumped. However, he knew that the Jing family had always stood on the neutral side and never participated in the matters between them. However, he also couldn't help but say that those old men's guts were really too big. They actually dared to come and assassinate the 3rd prince. However, he also received news that the 3rd prince came out by himself. He didn't bring anyone by his side. No wonder the young master said that the capital's sky was about to change. This time the 3rd prince was afraid that the odds were against him. Chapter 131. At night, the fire Qilin in the fantasy space suddenly opened its eyes. Its red pupils flashed with a bright light. Beligaju was lying on the carved wooden bed. Both of his hands were placed in front of his chest. His posture was as elegant as a noble sleeping in an ancient castle. However, he was not asleep. Under the silver mask, his long and narrow eyes exuded a faint chill. Swish! Countless swords fell from the top of his head. Beligaju's cold eyes narrowed. He did not move at all. All the swords seemed to be suspended in the air. Then Beligaju's eyes twitched. As if he had a reaction, those swords broke into pieces and turned into powder. The black-robed men were shocked. They looked at each other. Their bodies turned and landed on the ground. They were just about to launch a second attack. However, they saw the man turn his hand. Those swords seemed to be controlled by someone and stabbed towards them. The black-robed men stretched out their hands to block. Their whole body took a step back. Their throat was sweet and their internal organs were in pain. This person, he actually recovered his martial chi. The black-robed men once again exchanged glances. They wanted to send this news out. Want to run? Bailey Jiaju's extremely cold and stern voice was decisive. He pinched the neck of one of the people and slowly lifted him up. The action was full of murderous intent, but when he did it, it had a kind of indescribable beauty. Only a cracking sound was heard. Bailey Jiaju flung the limp man in his hand away. His pair of eyes were so calm that it made everyone feel terrified. Bailey Jiaju, the leader of the black-clothed men, saw that Bailey Jiaju's raised hand emitted waves of martial chi. Immediately, he was shocked and angry, but he had misgivings about Bailey Jiaju's powerful killing power when he raised his hand, so he unconsciously stepped back. Is this lord's name something you can casually call out? Beligaju sneered. This time he only moved his finger slightly. His indifferent look was simply unbearable. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the black-clothed man, who had retreated several meters away, shrieked and fell to the ground. Everyone's expression changed. At this moment, even though the men in black had the advantage in numbers, they didn't dare to face Beligaju's heaven-defying attack head-on, because no one had informed them that the 3rd prince had recovered his martial chi. However, since they were planning to assassinate the 3rd prince, they would not let it end so simply. It was as if there was no end to the black-robed men. As they rushed in wave after wave, The beautiful young man whose mouth was gagged narrowed his eyes as he watched the continuous slaughter. His thin lips that were originally curled up slowly stiffened. No, something was wrong. These were not the Han family soldiers who had come to save him. At first, he thought that they were his own people, because they were wearing the special clothes of the Han family. But when the sword fell beside him, the beautiful young man cursed in his heart, "Mother." He was only informing them so that they could teach his brother a lesson. He didn't ask them to cut him down. Furthermore, if they were truly the guards of the Han family, it was impossible for them to not recognize him. Ugh! The pretty boy moved his face and spat out the smelly sock in his mouth with great difficulty. "Brother, they are not the Han family's people." Just as his voice fell, the sound of horse hooves could be heard, echoing clearly in the empty alley. Hellion Vivian, who was walking back, turned around and pressed her back against the wall, listening to the sound getting closer and closer. A woman. Yuan Ming also pricked up his ears, and his expression changed. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment, then directly jumped onto the roof. Looking up, she saw a cloud of dust rolling in, as thousands of soldiers and horses galloped towards the inn. These soldiers and horses should be the soldiers stationed in the area, otherwise, it would be impossible for them to be mobilized in such a short period of time. But to mobilize such a large number of soldiers at night, it could only mean one thing: they wanted to secretly kill someone. Hellion Vivian's eyes narrowed as she secretly cursed in her heart. "This is bad. Woman, why are you running so fast?" Yuan Ming looked at the large number of soldiers approaching. "Woman, what do you want to do?" She clearly knew that it was dangerous, yet she still ran back. Hellion Vivian did not turn her head as she lightly said, "The third prince is waiting for me. That's why he is staying in the inn. But there are so many soldiers." Yuan Ming's voice was evil. "With your current strength, you won't be able to deal with them." Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a smile. "That's not necessarily true." The sound of horse hooves came closer, and the cloud of dust rolled. In the blink of an eye, over 10,000 soldiers had arrived in front of them. Beligaju stood at the front of the inn, his expression as indifferent as usual. His long phoenix eyes slightly narrowed, and his thin lips curled up, revealing a faint cold smile. When Hellion Vivian arrived, she saw this scene. What kind of situation was this? But this person could still smile. Moreover, his expression did not change at all, as if everything around him did not enter his eyes. The third prince was just like the rumors said. Nothing could break the innate elegance that came from his body, even if the current situation was very unfavorable for them. Hellion Vivian moved her gaze away from Beligaju and looked forward. The sound of horse hooves suddenly stopped because they had already arrived at the entrance of the inn. Hellion Vivian raised her hand, preparing to fight, but Beligaju forcefully pulled her into his arms, protecting her behind his back. Hellion Vivian was stunned for a moment, not knowing what to feel for a moment. "Kill!" The general in full armor gave the order, and the inn, which was not very big, was instantly surrounded by a tide of armored cavalry. Thousands of people surrounded them at the same time. 3 layers formed 3 layers. Even if the people in the inn grew wings, they would not be able to fly out. Killing intent enveloped the entire inn, and the situation was on the verge of exploding. Today's situation was clearly a planned attack. The other party's intention was very clear. They did not want Beligaju to return to the capital alive. Heh! In the midst of the crisscrossing murderous aura, Wei Wei clearly heard the man standing by her side laugh in a low voice. However, that laughter clearly carried killing intent. In the blink of an eye, the soldiers who were surrounding them fell down in rows, as if a forest had been ravaged by a strong wind. None of the soldiers who were near them were spared. Hellion Vivian could not help but be shocked. This kind of terrifying attack power, only the third prince could do it. The legendary gold level 10. Attack from the woman beside him. A man in black shouted from afar. It was clear that he was the leader of these people and he was quite smart. However, they miscalculated one thing, and that was that the person they wanted to attack was not a weak woman. Chapter 132. The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth curled up. She raised her hand and an umbrella appeared out of thin air. With a beautiful twist of her wrist, countless weapons fell down along with the rain. Then she heard a few miserable screams. No one was able to touch her at all. Instead, they were beaten up by her to the point that even standing up was a problem. Beligaju glanced in her direction and a light smile appeared in his eyes. That smile had a bit of ambiguity in it. She didn't know if it was unintentional or intentional. He reached out his hand and pulled her back. His tone was indifferent. "You stained me." Only then did Wei Wei react. His Highness was obsessed with cleanliness. She didn't understand at all. It's normal to be splashed with blood during fighting and killing. Someone like him who killed a large number of people and didn't even have the slightest bit of blood on his body was actually an anomaly. "Let's go." Bailey Jiaju narrowed his eyes and pulled Hellion Wei Wei over. He knew this group of people too well. This group of people had always been ruthless and did not leave the slightest bit of leeway. Therefore, they would definitely not let this matter go. Hellion Vivian also noticed this. Because more and more people were surrounding them, it was as if they couldn't kill them all. The other side even had rocket launchers. Even if they had 3 heads and 6 arms, it wouldn't be easy to dodge this kind of attack. Hellion Vivian looked at the slowly approaching black-clothed people. She knew that they were all specially trained experts. They came with the determination to win. Nothing good would come out of a head-on confrontation. It was better to let the third prince go. She would stay behind to deal with the aftermath and look for an opportunity to escape. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment. Then she whispered to Beligaju, "You go first." This Highness doesn't want to listen to your extremely stupid method." Beligaju didn't wait for Hellion Vivian to finish speaking. He glared fiercely at Hellion Vivian. There was an undisguised coldness in his eyes. Hellion Vivian was slightly surprised. With the third prince's intelligence, he definitely understood what she meant. He was also very clear that this was indeed beneficial to everyone. But why didn't he do that? Hellion Vivian looked up and was about to say something. Then, he was picked up from behind and carried on a shoulder. A slightly indifferent voice sounded in his ear. "If you have time to be long-winded, why don't you hurry up and leave?" Thus, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Hellion Vivian was carried by His Highness with one hand as he fought with the other. No matter how many people attacked him, Beligaju did not stop. His steps were graceful, but his speed was astonishing. Hellion Vivian weakly patted the man's thin but familiar shoulder. She couldn't wait to take a bite. The assassins in black rushed forward one by one and attacked her and Beligaju mercilessly. When the first group of black-clothed men fell, another group would rush up from behind. No one knew how many people the other party had prepared. After a long battle, even if she and Beligaju were made of iron, they would not be able to hold on. In the beginning, it was Beligaju who was carrying her. Behind them, it was the two of them who were back to back. The archers started to release arrows. More and more arrows were released, densely packed. Hellion Vivian was worried that those swords would injure Beligaju. She quickly turned around and helped him block those fire arrows. The black-clothed man standing to the side seemed to have long anticipated that Hellion Vivian would make such a move. Taking advantage of the time when she was protecting Beligaju, the sword in his hand changed direction and stabbed straight at Hellion Vivian. Beligaju's gaze paused. He grabbed Hellion Vivian and turned around, quickly bringing her to the side to avoid the black-clothed man. However, the fire arrow pierced straight into his arm. "Master!" The fire Qilin, who had hurriedly rushed back, cried out in alarm. It was as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were swaying, shaking the entire armament city. Hellion Vivian was even more stunned. Seeing the blood that gushed out and quickly dyed her clothes black, her heart suddenly tightened. She reached out to resist the second wave of attack and kicked that black-clothed man several meters away. "There's poison on the arrow." Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and looked at that black blood. The light in her eyes changed. "It's the cultivation scattering powder." The cultivation scattering powder was an extremely vicious poison. Especially for martial artists, it would rob a person of all their martial chi. According to reason, this kind of poison should not appear in the Dragon War Empire, because it had been clearly banned. However, unexpectedly, there were still people who used it. Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju's arm that was almost a foot away. Hundreds of thoughts ran through her mind thousands of times. Those black-clothed men madly rushed over. Even though they feared the sudden appearance of the fire Qilin, They also knew that once their master was injured, no matter how fierce the mythological beast was, it would be unable to resonate with their master. Not only that, as long as the third prince used his martial chi again, his martial chi value would rapidly decline. Once it reached the critical point, they didn't need to do anything. The third prince would be bitten back by the mythological beast contract, and his meridians would be broken. This was also the reason why these black-clothed men were unbridled and relentlessly pursued. Beligaju tightly grasped the sword in his hand. His long and narrow eyes deepened. Seeing this, Hellion Vivian paused. Her fingers also tightened. She knew that as long as Beligaju used his martial chi, the poison would quickly spread. The poison in his body would quickly enter his body. When that time came, he was afraid that she absolutely couldn't let him lose all his martial chi because of her. Hellion Vivian's always indifferent and lazy eyes suddenly became piercingly cold and sharp. Yuan Ming. She used her consciousness to summon her own familiar. Her eyes slightly flashed like a demon. I command you as your master to kill them all. Yuan Ming licked his thin lips. Then what about their souls? To be nourishment for you. As soon as Hellion Vivian's voice fell, her long hair slightly moved. The surrounding air seemed to have some changes, little by little spreading in all directions. The black-clothed men were all stunned. They couldn't take another step forward. Their eyes couldn't open because of the strong wind, so they could only stretch out their hands to block. Then, at this moment, Hellion Vivian grabbed Beligaju's arm. Her whole body was like an unsheathed sword, directly piercing towards the center of the black-clothed men. Wherever she went, no one was lucky enough to escape. Those black-clothed men only saw a flash of silver light in front of their eyes. It was as if someone used a hand to choke their throat. When they reacted, they were already dead. A strong wind suddenly rose, which made the black-clothed men's commander confused. They didn't know where they were at all. In less than 10 seconds, a tornado swept past. When they opened their eyes again, the dead people in front of them were all their own people. As for the third prince, they didn't know where he went. But the only thing they were sure of was that those two people didn't run far, because the tornado disappeared around here. The black-clothed men's judgment was correct. Hellion Vivian and Beligaju didn't run too far. Hellion Vivian's body had limited physical strength. If it wasn't for today's siege, she wouldn't have used the martial and devil dual cultivation technique. Firstly, it was because it consumed too much martial chi. Secondly, it was because if a discerning person saw her technique, they would know that it was related to the devils. And in Dragon War Empire, devil cultivators were not allowed. Chapter 133. When dealing with devil cultivators, the 4 great clans would immediately exterminate them. Even the Imperial clan was against devil cultivators, because there was such a legend in the Dragon War Empire. Legend has it that for thousands of years, the divine continent was not ruled by real humans. Instead, it was ruled by a man with devil blood flowing in his veins. But he was not interested in power. No matter how prosperous the outside world was, it had nothing to do with him. He only lived in his palace, had an appearance and eternal life that everyone envied, and sat on top of all the devils in the world. Whether it was divine beasts or humans, they all worshipped him. They wanted to get close to him, but at the same time they revered him in their hearts. But humans could not be controlled by a devil forever. So the aristocratic family sent another girl to get close to this man. The girl did not dare to believe that in this world, there was such a noble person other than herself. He only sat on the throne and did not even look at her. Noble and indifferent, he looked at the gloomy forest outside the window. Half of his face was propped up, and with a casual smile it made the world lose its face. The girl fell in love with this man, but in the end, in order to obtain the entire divine continent, she chose to betray him. She gathered 4 powerful monks from the Buddhist and Taoist sects, and with their blood and lives as a guide, she set up 4 demon-slaying seals along the divine continent's mountain range in the north, south, east, and west. The Taoist scriptures recorded the history like this. At that time, the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked, ghosts cried and gods howled, and blood rained down from the sky for 7 days and 7 nights. The demons fell into the yellow springs, never to see the light of day again. It was to trap the man because the girl knew how strong the man was, As long as he was slightly weaker, she would not be able to suppress him. Not to mention, he still had the 4 great divine beasts, the fire Qilin by his side. Just like that, the man disappeared, and even the 4 great divine beasts, the fire Qilin, were seriously injured and raised in the spirit forest. People wanted to tame it countless times, and even wanted to use a divine beast contract to restrict it, but they were always bitten back. When the fire Qilin appeared again, the 4 great clans panicked, because it was said that the person chosen by the fire Qilin would very likely become a generation's king. Humans were like this when it came to their own interests. They would always do what was most beneficial to them and even kill them. The 3rd prince did not go to the devil cultivator, and they treated him like this. If others knew that she had the devil's emissary, she wondered what those people would do to her. That's why Wei Wei didn't order Yuan Ming around all this time in order to avoid being discovered. Now she could only hope that the 3rd prince didn't notice anything because her actions were too fast. As Hellion Vivian thought of this, she looked in the man's direction. She saw that there was something wrong with his eyes. It was as if he couldn't see anything. How could this be? Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. The cultivation dissipation powder did not have the effect of blinding people. Beligaju said faintly, "The poison from 10 years ago has relapsed." "You're talking about the fire in the palace." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. These people from the 4 great clans were really vicious and merciless. "Give me your hand." Regardless of the poison in the past, she had to treat his current wounds first. Beligaju paused, then handed over his left hand. Hellion Vivian tore his sleeve into pieces. She knew that the poison was very strong, but she did not expect that it would penetrate so quickly. There was no time. The skin around the wound was slowly turning black. She must immediately think of a way. If she had the tools at hand, she could also do a small operation for him. She had too many disguised identities, so holding a scalpel was not a big deal for her. But now, not only did she not have any tools, those black-clothed people had not left, and they would find them in a short time. However, this kind of poison could not be delayed. If it was delayed, the 3rd prince may be crippled. Hellion Vivian tasted what it was like to be a waste in the Dragon War Empire. This body reminded her almost every day, because she did not know martial qi, she was humiliated. Bailey Jiaju had already lost his martial qi once because of the fire in the past. Hellion Vivian knew that it was easy for people to go from low to high, and from high to low no one would know the pain in her heart. Not to mention a cold perfectionist like Beligaju. In the end, if it were not for her, he would definitely be able to avoid that arrow. Hellion Vivian looked up. His pair of beautiful eyes had lost their usual indifference and coldness. There was no reflection in them. Under her hand was a man's skin that was not hot like before. Hellion Vivian was shocked by the heat coming from his body. He had a fever, and the temperature was shockingly high. "You have a fever, when did this happen?" She wanted to know if the change in his body temperature was related to the cultivation dissipation powder. Bailey Jiaju looked deeply at her, who was almost a foot away from him. The two of them were very close to each other. Because she wanted to avoid being searched by the men in black, she simply sat in his arms and was more obedient than ever. However, fever? No matter what, Bailey Jiaju was always cold and indifferent. "Am I having a fever?" Hellion Vivian heard this and was almost speechless. Did he not even know when he had a fever? "How about this? I'll ask in a different way. When did you feel a headache?" Hellion Vivian watched the man press his long eyebrows with his slender fingers. While rolling up his long sleeves, he sorted out his thoughts. Beligaju looked at her expressionlessly. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched twice. "Don't tell me you don't even know when you have a headache." "I know." His Highness gave her 2 words very casually. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She could finally communicate. "When was that?" "The day you ran away." His Highness did not even change his tone of voice. His elegance had a self-proclaimed coldness. Hellion Vivian. At this time, the 3rd prince was still in the mood to choke her. Was he trying to make her feel even more guilty? No. The 3rd prince should not have that kind of character. Hellion Vivian restrained her emotions. "So you have been burning for 3 days and 2 nights. How could there be such a person?" The world was right. The 3rd prince was not a person, he was a god. "I don't know." Beligaju turned his face to the side. His motionless expression showed indifference, letting the wound ooze blood. That's it. It seems that the situation is not so bad. At least the cultivation dissipation powder's poison is not so deep. Helian Weiwei's eyes turned and her line of sight fell on Bailey Jiaju's hand. She didn't think too much about it. Instead, she fiercely exhaled and then quickly bent down. Chapter 134. Baligaju's fingers paused. His cold thin lips parted as he looked at Helian Vivian, who had placed her thin lips on his arm to help him absorb the poison. Suddenly, his eyes congealed and he directly pushed the person to the side. He forcefully pressed down on her wrist, his voice indifferent. Do you know what kind of poison this is? Even if you indiscriminately suck it in. Cultivation scattering powder, bah! Helian Vivian spat out a mouthful of black blood that she had just sucked out. She carelessly met his eyes. It's only a little less martial qi. When the time comes, I'll just cultivate again. Hey, I say, Your Highness, can't you just be an obedient blind person? His eyes couldn't see, yet his strength was still so great. Sure enough, he wasn't human. Helian Vivian let out a long sigh. She was prepared to wait for an opportunity to continue sucking out the poisoned blood for him. Baligaju directly used his left hand to press against her head. This Highness sees that you don't want to live anymore. Yes, yes, yes. Wait until you have the strength to kill my 9 generations. Helian Vivian leaned over while her mouth vaguely said, It's best to kill all of those people from the Helian family. That would also save her from wasting her own strength. Baligaju's eyes seemed to slightly flash as he looked at the hairy little head in front of him. In the depths of his eyes, there seemed to be a faint trace of gentleness. Don't look at how this woman was normally vicious and merciless. When she was well behaved, she actually looked quite pleasing to the eye. Alright, it's about time. Helian Vivian continuously sucked in a few mouthfuls of black blood, spitting it out on the ground. She looked at the wound. However, this is only temporary. We must find a place as soon as possible to help you clean up the remaining poison. After she finished speaking, she again continuously spat out 2 mouthfuls of black blood. Her lips were somewhat numb and she felt some martial qi drain. However, it couldn't be considered much. Just like she said, when the time came it would be fine to cultivate again. On the contrary, Yuan Ming evilly laughed. Woman, you're really generous to this third prince. It can't be that you've fallen in love with him, right? Helian Vivian chuckled and replied silently, You always say that I have feelings for you. Until now, do I have feelings for you? Maybe it's because you feel that I don't like you that you decided to take a step back and choose the third prince. Yuan Ming's narcissism was directly proportional to his age. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. Wake up, will you? No matter how bad your eyes are, they all know that you're the second best. Even if the third prince was an evildoer, he was still a perfect evildoer. The others were indeed no match for him. Helian Vivian's gaze then fell on Baligaju's side profile. She wondered what this evildoer looked like. It was said that the fire had disfigured the third prince. That was why the third prince wore a silver mask all year round. Except for a very small number of people, no one could see his true face. In the past, Helian Vivian had believed this rumor. But now, Helian Vivian felt that with this evildoer's style, his face shouldn't have been disfigured. It was very possible that this was a smokescreen deliberately released by the man. It was said that curiosity could kill the cat. The more Helian Vivian looked at the man in front of her, the more her heart itched. Because the two of them were in an especially close position, the tip of her nose was filled with the man's pleasant smell of sandalwood. It faintly lingered in the surroundings, as if it could cover a person in a small world. No matter how chaotic the situation outside was, no matter how dangerous it was, it wouldn't reveal the slightest trace on his body. On the contrary, it would give people a kind of indifference as if he held the world in his hands. Helian Vivian's eyes moved. Although she knew that the situation wasn't right, she wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to get close to the third prince and see what he looked like. Thinking like this, Helian Vivian cautiously raised her hand and was just about to quickly remove that silver mask. But the man's hand turned around and pressed down on her wrist. His voice was deep and heavy. Not being honest again? We're trapped here, so we have to find something to do. Hellion Vivian pretended to be regretful and said, "Thinking about it, I'm so young and I'm about to be surrounded and killed. Before I die, I have to know what the people around me look like." Beligaju listened to her roguish tone and his thin lips slowly curved up. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but his breath hit her left ear little by little. He said with a deep meaning, "You definitely don't want to see this king's appearance. I'm a person who doesn't care much about beauty or ugliness. It was pure curiosity that caused trouble." Hellion Vivian shrugged her shoulders and continued to be eager to try. Beligaju laughed in a low voice. It was cold and indifferent, but it also had a playful feeling that Hellion Vivian didn't understand. Then he said, "The person who takes off this king's mask will have to accompany this king for a lifetime. Are you sure you want to take it off?" When Hellion Vivian heard this, she immediately pulled back her hand. Bailey Jiaju naturally sensed her movements. His originally empty eyes suddenly sank fiercely, and the corners of his mouth were also dyed with a faint iciness. She couldn't avoid him at all costs. He had just thought that she was very obedient. It seemed like everything was just an illusion. A fox was always very cunning, so he couldn't let down his guard against her. Thinking of this, Beligaju raised his numb hand and pressed it against his forehead. When Hellion Vivian saw his movements, she retracted her hand and reached out again. But she didn't lift his silver mask and still put the back of her hand on his forehead. Her hand was very cool. When it was placed on his burning forehead, it made the slightly uncomfortable Beligaju slightly relax his long eyebrows. And Hellion Vivian was scalded by that temperature. The fever didn't reach his legs and his body temperature kept rising. Even if the third prince wasn't human, he still needed to be treated as soon as possible. Hellion Vivian had just opened her mouth when she heard the sound of footsteps from not far away. Those people were coming. Hellion Vivian's breathing became sluggish. Before the flying arrows arrived, she quickly stretched out her fingers and an umbrella appeared out of nowhere. With a sweep of her long legs, 3 or 4 black-clothed people fell to the ground together. "Let's go." Hellion Vivian wanted to pull Beligaju up, but she saw him standing there, unhurriedly using his fingers to brush off the dust that wasn't on his body. His voice was as indifferent as before. "No need." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju pulled her back with a pair of indifferent eyes. His voice carried a trace of evil that had never been there before. "We can also compete with them in terms of numbers." Just as the man's voice fell, Hellion Vivian saw that not far away, countless war horses were galloping from the distance. Those people were all wearing black riding clothes. Their faces were black, and their hands were holding swords. They were like a black wind that swept over. Everywhere they went there was blood. However, the man just stood in this bloody scene without even blinking. He didn't even care about the slightest bit of dust. He was always so clean and cold like a high and mighty god. But Hellion Vivian knew that he was never a soft-hearted god. He was a demon. Chapter 135. It's the Shadow Guards. Why would they appear here? Didn't they say that the third prince didn't bring a single person? The men in black looked at each other in dismay. Clearly, they were caught off guard by this sudden situation. They looked at the cavalrymen who were flanking them from both sides and dropped the swords in their hands. They wanted to seize the opportunity to escape, but how could Beligaju allow this to happen? He stood at the entrance of the wind and looked down at this scene from a high vantage point. He calmly and unhurriedly took out a white handkerchief and wiped away the bloodstains on Wei Wei's fingers. His thin lips slightly curved. "Kill." It was only one word, but Hellion Vivian could feel an unprecedented sense of oppression. The black mass of cavalrymen swept past, bringing along the sound of martial chi with them. This was the legendary Ghost Palace, killing 3,000 crows, not leaving a single one alive. Hellion Vivian almost suspected that the third prince was doing this on purpose. He was deliberately waiting for the black-clothed people to come out before he mobilized the cavalry to surround and kill them. Just as she was thinking this, Hellion Vivian felt a weight on her shoulder. The man who was originally standing there suddenly leaned on her shoulder. Hellion Vivian moved her hands and propped him up. She didn't care about the shadow guards who were leading the cavalry, and wanted to drag the third prince away from here first. Beligaju tried his best to hold on to his last bit of willpower. His voice was extremely cold. Tell them to leave one alive for this highness. Kill the rest without mercy. Okay. Hellion Vivian listened to the man's cold voice and raised her eyebrows. She once again sighed at the abnormal physical strength of a certain highness. At this time the fire Qilin also came over. Because the owner's weakness would be returned to the divine beast 10 times, the fire Qilin's condition didn't look very good. But this didn't affect its ability to bite those black-clothed people who tried to get close to Hellion Vivian and the others. It basically crushed them to death with one claw. However, it didn't continue to fight. In its heart, only the safety of its master was the most important. How is master? Such a huge divine beast suddenly opened its mouth to speak. Hellion Vivian felt that the originally unstable road was trembling even more. She glanced at it and said, "Bend down." The fire Qilin had never been ordered by anyone other than its master, so it was somewhat stunned. Wei Wei immediately pressed down on its big head. After that, she dragged Bailey Jiaju up. After that, she nimbly flipped over, her voice neither soft nor soft. Third prince needs treatment. First go find a quieter place. It's best if there's hot water and a bed. The fire Qilin took a deep look at Hellion Vivian. It had seen many different types of women, but it had never seen one as calm as Hellion Vivian. The fire Qilin didn't say anything else and displayed its divine beast nature. It spread out its 4 limbs, and its large wings spread out from both sides. It was tall and sturdy like the war horse of the Grim Reaper in comics. When the fire Qilin flew, there would be a strong wind. Hellion Vivian could only grab onto its red fur. But she only had one thought in her heart. If there was a chance in the future, she would definitely tell the winged beast that had once carried her that their boss' beautiful fur wasn't soft at all. Moreover, when it flew, it was a bit too irritable. The people sitting on its back couldn't even open their eyes because of its flashing wings. It was also because of the fire Qilin that Hellion Vivian and the others quickly found a suitable place to treat their injuries. Hellion Vivian didn't forget what Beligaju had just instructed her. She turned her head towards the fire Qilin and said, "Go tell those shadows, leave one alive for investigation, kill the rest without mercy." This was the second time this woman had ordered it. The fire Qilin calmly moved its claws, its voice without the slightest ripple. "Those things, young Master Han can do them all. The most important thing now is to heal Master." "Young Master Han?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Little tyrant?" She really imagined the appearance of a beautiful youth brandishing a sword and playing with a spear. However, since the fire Qilin had said so, it meant that the youth wasn't as simple as he looked on the surface. Hellion Vivian gathered her thoughts and put them on Beligaju's wound. Even the skin there had turned black, and the surrounding muscles had begun to show signs of stiffness. The poison that she had just suppressed by sucking blood had begun to spread again. The cultivation scattering powder's poison wasn't easy to detoxify, and they wouldn't be able to find the antidote in a short time. Even if the third prince had ordered to leave one alive, that person didn't seem to have the antidote on him. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment, and decided to do it herself. The third prince has been poisoned by the cultivation scattering powder. Ordinary medicine simply can't treat it. You go prepare a bucket of hot water, a jar of Nuerhong, a few pieces of white cloth, as well as a needle and thread bag. I'll need them in a while. Hellion Vivian ordered the fire Qilin with a clear mind. She didn't forget to take out a pill from her bosom and put it into Beligaju's mouth. This time the fire Qilin didn't care about the taste of her orders. It quickly transformed into its human form and prepared all the things that Hellion Vivian wanted it to prepare. Hellion Vivian took the things and skillfully pulled up her long sleeves, rolling them up a few times, exposing her snow-white wrists. She reached out to tear all the clothes on Beligaju's body to shreds. She didn't expect that the royal sense of defense was more powerful than she had imagined. Just as her fingers were about to touch his chest, he suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with an unusual light, as if he was going to tear her apart with his own hands if she were to get any closer. His eyes were filled with a thick evil aura. When he saw that the person in front of him was her, those deep eyes gradually recovered their calm. His voice was hoarse and low. "What are you doing?" "I'm giving you a small operation." Hellion Vivian didn't mind his vigilance. She was the same. She would never let anyone get close to her, especially when she was injured. She would be more aggressive than usual, because she needed to protect herself. Like the third prince who was finally chased from time to time, and was betrayed by his personal maid, it was estimated that he would be even more like this. So Hellion Vivian raised her hands and let him see the silver knife and needle in her hands. Then she continued, "You were unconscious just now. Since you are awake now, you can take it off yourself. It will save me the trouble of doing it." The fire Chilin's eyes turned round when he heard this. This woman ordered him, but she even dared to order his master. Was she afraid that his master would be impatient and cut off her claws? The fire Chilin touched his chin, but he saw his master just raise his eyebrows. Then he really slowly untied the fur robe. His chest was exposed, and his honey-colored skin was plated with a layer of silver under the moonlight. It was like flowing satin, storing an astonishing explosive power. Chapter 136. Hellion Vivian had always thought that the third prince's figure would be very good, but she didn't expect it to be so good to the point that it was pleasing to the eye. She suddenly felt that he should find a chance to go to the fragrant garden or something. He would definitely be able to sell for a good price. Saliva. The man's cold voice rang in her ears. If that kind of self-centered sitting posture were to be taken out, the group of noble ladies in the capital would definitely faint again. However, the third prince always liked to have a poisonous tongue, which was not desirable for her. Let him have his poisonous tongue. Later, she would charge him more surgery fee. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian's mouth curved into a smile. She reached out and took out the needle and thread, then smoked it under the oil lamp. Her movements were very professional, so fast that it made people dazzled. After the silver needle was done, Hellion Vivian wiped the man's body temperature. It was actually higher than before. She didn't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing that he could still stay awake with a fever like this. If the other party was unconscious, she could use the knife on his body without any scruples. But he was awake, so she had to carefully serve him. She couldn't take the opportunity to see what he looked like. Hellion Vivian felt uncomfortable, and secretly decided to double the surgery fee. Drink the newer Hong, it can stop the pain. Hellion Vivian swept away the indifference and leisurely from before. She tied up the scattered hair again and carefully fixed the strands that were scattered around his ears. Her whole body emitted a cautious and evil aura. "Lie down. Lie down." Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows. A pair of long and narrow eyes stopped at the bayonet in Hellion Vivian's hand. Hellion Vivian met his gaze and thin lips curved. "You can also sit down, but it will hurt more when you use the knife." Beligaju faintly hummed, but didn't do anything. Hellion Vivian understood his meaning and didn't say anything more. She directly took the wine and drank a mouthful, but didn't swallow it. Instead, she sprayed it all on Beligaju's wound. Following that, she picked up the silver knife and ruthlessly cut along the lines of his muscles. Bailey Jiaju's thin lips tightened as his line of sight moved upwards. A delicate and pretty little face was reflected in his clear peach blossom eyes. Being stared at by the man like this, Hellion Vivian didn't panic at all. She dug out the arrowhead and began to clean the wound with cold wine. After cleaning it, she picked up a needle and stitched up Beligaju's wound. When Beligaju saw this, a faint light flashed in his cold eyes. He had seen countless famous doctors, but he had never seen such a treatment method. Was there such a treatment method in the Divine Land? Beligaju's eyes darkened as he asked casually, "What do you think of possession?" Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly skipped a beat, but her hands remained calm as she continued, "I haven't studied it." Could it be that this man had discovered something? Hellion Vivian's eyes tightened. In the Divine Land, the most forbidden thing was possession. The so-called possession was a change of soul from the original body. It was basically the same as her current situation. The possessor would be burned in a raging fire for 3 days and 3 nights. She didn't want to be treated as some kind of demon. That's why she hid everything and didn't even disclose her identity as the owner of Profound Heavens. Although that would bring her a lot of convenience, at the same time there would be people watching her. Hellion Guangyao wasn't stupid. Even Hellion Jiaoer had a bit of brain. It was impossible for a person to change so much in one night. She had to take it slow and let them think that other than her change in temperament, everything else was obtained by luck. Only this way could she avoid unnecessary trouble. However, she didn't understand what the third prince meant by asking her this. Did he discover her? Or was he just casually chatting? Because after the third prince finished speaking, he didn't continue this topic. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and didn't show any abnormalities in front of this man. What if this man was just swindling her? After all, this man loved to do this kind of thing the most. Hellion Vivian decided not to think about anything and just pretended that she didn't hear anything. She continued to lower her head and concentrated on bandaging him. Beligaju slowly withdrew his line of sight from Hellion Vivian's face. His long and narrow eyes were filled with deep meaning. Hellion Vivian thought for a while and felt that something was wrong. She paused and raised her head. Your eyes can see now. Beligaju's voice was indifferent as he responded. Hellion Vivian frowned. When can I see? Beligaju glanced sideways and deeply looked at her. His tone was neither fast nor slow. When you peeked at my body just now. Hellion Vivian was speechless. When did she peek at his body? He made her sound so evil. She was openly admiring him, okay? Only this man could say such words in such an indifferent manner. She simply couldn't have a pleasant conversation. Hellion Vivian grinned, revealing 2 small dimples. Although her smile was sweet, it definitely wasn't harmless. Oh right, I forgot to tell your highness. It will hurt even more later. Hellion Vivian didn't do it on purpose. Once the alcohol's anesthesia wore off, the cut would start to hurt. In addition, Beligaju still had a fever. It was possible that the wound would cause him to fall into a coma. It was a good thing that it hurt a little. She was afraid that when the time came, he would be confused by the fever and wouldn't even feel pain. Hellion Vivian thought of this and soaked the handkerchief in the alcohol. She didn't care about the difference between men and women. Seeing that the man's spirits were low, she would use alcohol to wipe his body. This was the best way to reduce the fever. Thus, for the entire night, Hellion Vivian did the same thing, soaking the handkerchief and wiping Beligaju's joints. Sometimes she would even observe his wound. Gradually, Hellion Vivian couldn't resist the urge to sleep. She sat on the bed and fell asleep, holding the white handkerchief in her hand. After Beligaju's fever subsided, this was the scene he saw. Hellion Weiwei's little head was about to droop down bit by bit. The man's deep and narrow eyes deepened. Just as that head was about to hit the bed, Beligaju's well-defined right hand gently covered her head and successfully pressed her into his embrace. As if she was finally comfortable, Hellion Vivian rubbed her small face and found a comfortable position. Like a cat, her thin lips curled up. Beligaju watched this scene and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up into a faint smile. The next morning, the wind was gentle and the birds were chirping. Hellion Vivian opened her eyes and saw a golden ray of sunlight shining in, causing her to slightly squint her eyes. Just as she was about to get up and move around, she found that she seemed to be pressing down on something hard. She slightly raised her eyes to look and saw that she was pressing down on the third prince. Chapter 137. Beligaju's masked face glowed with a faint silver light under the sunlight. He was so handsome that it was somewhat dazzling. Only his temperament was too calm. He was so indifferent and cold that it made people feel like it was blasphemy to get close to him. Hellion Vivian stared at the man in front of her. Because of the sudden change in scene, she was a bit confused. Her body also stiffened and she stopped moving. However, while she was lost in thought, Beligaju's cold voice suddenly sounded and instantly pulled her back to reality. If you want to look at this king, then sit properly. This king is uncomfortable with you pressing down on me like this. Every word was like a gem and there was no trace of sleepiness. Or are you saying that you just want to throw yourself into my arms? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Her eyes moved down and she gave a cool smile. With your highness' current state, you don't have the qualifications to criticize me. Beligaju kept his hands behind his head. His lazy appearance made it seem like the one who had a reaction wasn't him at all. He was simply an evildoer among evildoers. Hellion Vivian couldn't compare to the other's face. She pulled back her hands and planned to get up, Beligaju's eyes were half closed as he looked at the woman in front of him. His expression seemed to be quite dissatisfied with losing a pillow. This king still hasn't slept enough. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. What did he mean, this king still hasn't slept enough? What did it have to do with her whether he slept enough or not? Moreover, his posture clearly showed that he wasn't hugging a person but a pet. How did she look like a pet? Hellion Vivian was just about to use violence to subdue the third prince when she heard a slightly hoarse and deep voice with a unique coldness. In the future, don't snore when you sleep. Hellion Vivian stared at him. How did she snore when she slept? Aside from personal attacks, what else could this third prince do? Isn't it tiring to live in the clouds all day long? What's the point of caring about so many details? Hellion Vivian looked at the man who was close to her and secretly cursed. Even his sleeping posture was so perfect that it was abnormal. He didn't feel tired at all. She had been sleepy for a long time. Anyway, there weren't any extra beds here. After helping His Highness's fever for an entire night, her eyes were a little tired. Hellion Weiwei adjusted her position and moved closer to the bed to take a nap. But why were the three sovereigns lying down as well? Hellion Vivian thought that a clean freak like him would get up as soon as he woke up, just like last time in Spirit Forest. Looking at the current situation, he did not intend to look for another room. There was a man lying beside her in such an unbridled manner, and the surrounding was filled with the distinct scent of dragon yin sandalwood, with a unique cold aura. Hellion Vivian's line of sight couldn't help but stop at the side of his face with the mask on. The high bridge of his nose, the thin corners of his lips, and the cold lines always gave people the illusion that their hearts would stop beating. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian felt her eyelids become heavy. She simply yawned and went back to sleep. Beligaju still maintained his original position as he lay to the side. Looking at the sleeping Hellion Vivian, his ink-black eyes gradually sank. The sleeping Hellion Weiwei appeared to be very quiet. What didn't change was still that roguish aura. He didn't know where she learned it from. Her slender and thick eyelashes covered her eyelids, fluttering like a butterfly's wings. Her nose was small and delicate. The black ink on her face was a little smudged. She looked like a stupid fox that fell into the ink. However, Beligaju knew that this fox would only settle down when she was sleeping. Usually Beligaju's eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's left hand that was placed on his waist. He reached out and pinched Hellion Vivian's palm. Just like what Hellion Vivian said, that action didn't seem like he was pinching a person but more like he was pinching a pet. Therefore, even now, the third prince was still considering whether or not to directly cripple this pair of scratching claws. Disobedient little thing. Bailey Jiaju's eyes darkened again as he looked at her slightly cold side profile. He pulled the quilt over and pulled Hellion Weiwei into his embrace along with the quilt. He also planned to sleep for a while. Your Highness, Shadow tentatively called inside. In reality, he had already stayed outside for a long time, but he was afraid to disturb his master's rest. What made him surprised was that His Highness could actually tolerate someone else sleeping in the same bed as him. One had to know that His Highness's obsession with cleanliness had reached a certain level. That year, when His Highness tamed the fire Cheelant's beast form, His Highness raised it by his side and they lived together for half a month. After that, no one was able to spend the night by His Highness' side. Could it be that His Highness really intended to raise Miss Hellion as a pet? Or could it be that it was because of other reasons? While Shadow was thinking, Beligaju already stood up. He was still wearing yesterday's ancient long robe. The collar was half open. With a whoosh he pulled open the wooden door, revealing the abs that would make people jealous. The long robe on the wooden table seemed to be blown up by the wind and steadily fell on the man's shoulder. The long black robe hung straight down, showing off the perfect white skin. It brought a strong visual impact and filled the air with a familiar feeling of asceticism. The wound on his arm not only didn't make him look battered, it instead added a different kind of evil to him than usual. Shadow looked at him like this and his entire person was stunned. Combined with the conversation just now, and what Miss Hellion did to His Highness he couldn't have been raped by Miss Hellion, right? No, it definitely couldn't be. He must be thinking too much. Shadow shook his head. Beligaju, wearing a mink fur black robe, had a languid expression as he reclined on the wooden chair at the side. His fingers took off the silver mask, and the bright light shone on his face. One could faintly see the man's incomparably handsome side profile, as if he was the world's most perfect jade sculpture, making people unable to move their line of sight away. How is it? Bailey Jiaju extended a hand and picked up the celadone cup on the table. The joints of his hands were clearly defined, contrasting with the delicate porcelain cup. Even the space between his fingers was suffused with a pure and cold radiance like white jade. It was that kind of scholarly thin hand, but it made people feel as if it could hold the entire universe in its palm. Replying to His Highness, only one was left alive. The news was also released, saying that they provoked young Master Han. Shadow knelt on the ground and respectfully replied. The man indifferently sipped a mouthful of tea, his black eyes slightly drooping, not knowing where he was looking. He only indifferently ordered, "Continue to watch." "Yes." Shadow responded. "Then, should we tell Miss Hellion about His Highness's identity at White Academy?" Beligaju's finger that was turning the silver mask paused. His expression was indifferent. "No need, everything is as usual." "Yes." Shadow bowed his head and withdrew. Beligaju once again put the silver mask on his face and walked to the bedside in the inner room. His fingers rubbed Hellion Vivian's cheek, the corners of his mouth curved up devilishly. Chapter 138. When Hellion Vivian woke up again, it was already noon. The third prince was sitting by the window drinking tea. He looked unhurried, as if he was waiting for her to wake up so that he could hurry on with his journey. He had a high fever for several days, but he recovered in just one night. Hellion Vivian had never seen a person with such a strong recovery ability. However, she also didn't care. Lying on the bed and stretching, she looked at Bailey Jiaju and slowly smiled, carrying a clear and cold shrewdness. "Since His Highness is well, then let's talk about the matter of the consultation fee." Beligaju didn't say anything. He only raised his eyebrows and looked at her. He lazily leaned against the wooden chair with his legs slightly crossed. His aura was cold and luxurious. He didn't look like he was injured at all. Hellion Vivian took out a small abacus from her space and started to calculate. "One mouthful of poisonous blood is worth 10 taels. I drank about 7 mouthfuls, so a small operation is worth at least 80 taels. In addition to the night of fever rubbing, I'll give you 100 taels. The rest of the expenses are also 10 taels, so that's a total of 180 taels." Calculating to this point, she frowned. 180 taels? Why does it feel like something is wrong? "Oh right, I also fed Your Highness a pill. I'll charge you 20 taels to round it up." After speaking without waiting for the man to respond, a pair of slender white hands reached over. "The total is 200 taels. Your Highness can pay the bill." Bailey Jiaju looked at the lush and delicate fingers in front of his eyes. His extremely deep and dark eyes looked up. The rays of light refracted by the sunlight seemed to fall into his pair of slender peach blossom eyes, bright and moving. 200 taels? This woman really dared to open her mouth like a lion. He raised his eyelids and looked at the pure silver abacus in Hellion Vivian's hand. His voice was faint. "Are you short of money?" When Hellion Vivian heard this, she felt that there was hope for the money. She nodded and smiled. Beligaju leisurely put down the teacup in his hand. "The silver that I won from you seems to be more than 200 taels. Is Your Highness planning to reconcile the accounts?" Hellion Vivian looked at him with clear eyes. "That's a separate matter." Beligaju looked at her. After a long while, his thin lips slightly hooked. "You really don't know or pretend not to know?" "What?" Hellion Vivian felt that the third prince's appearance was an insult to her intelligence. Beligaju's eyes were clear and cold. In the Dragon War Empire, after marriage, the property is managed by the wife. Hellion Vivian's outstretched hand paused for a moment. Did the royal mean that she would be in charge of the money in the future? It had to be said that sometimes the royal family, who were indifferent to fame and fortune, also had their cute side. Hellion Vivian took the abacus again. She paused, raised her head and asked, "It is said that the Ghost Palace has a lot of rare treasures, is that true?" Beligaju indifferently responded. There was no change in the expression on his face. Hellion Vivian calculated the abacus. "Also, I heard that when you were young, the retired emperor gave you a lot of tungsten and told you to play with it as you pleased?" Beligaju nodded. It was just a simple action of drinking tea, but it could be seen that he had a good upbringing. Hellion Vivian was angry in her heart. This was the difference between them. They were both trash. The royal family played with armaments parts like toys. She didn't even know what armaments were. She even foolishly chased after Murong Chongfeng to play with them. Thinking carefully, did she count as marrying a tall, rich and handsome man, and walking to the peak of life? Although it was only a contract marriage. Everything was fake. But looking at it now, it was really not bad. However, Hellion Vivian wasn't used to doing nothing and only taking advantage of others. She put down the abacus and smiled faintly. Your Highness, how about giving those armaments parts in your hands to me? When the time comes to earn money, we'll split it 50-50. Beligaju finally looked at her. The corners of his mouth curved into a meaningful smile. Okay. Then let's sign the contract as soon as possible. Hellion Vivian said as she took a brush from the desk and was about to start writing. In fact, Hellion Vivian felt that her writing was pretty good. At least for a modern Secret Service agent, being able to use a proper brush to write without spilling ink everywhere was already pretty good. But it still made the aloof third prince, who was like a male god, frown. You used this kind of writing to enter White Academy? When Hellion Vivian raised her head, her face was smeared with ink. Don't you think that my writing is very artistic? Beligaju sneered. It's really ugly to the point that other people can't understand. Hellion Vivian. Now she finally understood why the third prince chose her. Apart from her skin being more eye-catching at that time, there was another point. It was because the third prince wanted to attack her from time to time to highlight his own superiority. Probably because he was helpless against her. Beligaju leaned over and held the brush across the back of her hand. He lightly slid the tip of his nose down. Every word was so clear that it could directly be made into a modern copybook. Like moving clouds and flowing water, it also carried a faint domineering aura. The way he held the brush was very bold. He was born with a kind of imposing manner that controlled the overall situation. His writing was also very strong. However, this kind of posture seemed to be hugging her from behind. Hellion Weiwei's long, shapely eyebrows creased, and she wanted to give up her position. Don't move. Bailey Jiaju's chest almost stuck to her back. His long eyebrows knitted as his slender fingertips fell. His voice was clear and cold without the slightest ripple. Done. Then, he stood up straight and looked at her condescendingly, as if he was looking at a stranger. Sure enough, she was overthinking. Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a smile and gradually began to look at the contract. Some of them were written by her, and some were added by the third prince. The core idea was still the same, which was to be loving in front of others, and be strangers behind them. But there was one point. Wouldn't the scale of the wedding be too big? Did they have to announce it to the world? Hellion Vivian's gaze landed on the last clause. Biting the end of the pen, she raised her eyebrows. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Just make a more ordinary wedding. The man looked up and casually glanced at her. How can my Beligaju's wedding be ordinary? Hellion Vivian. Then let's do it like this first. When we think of something, we'll add it. Hellion Vivian deliberately looked at the clause of husband and wife's obligation. There was the word no written at the end. She was relieved. She took the red rouge and pressed her fingerprint. Then, with a faint smile, she pushed the paper away to Beligaju. The man half raised his eyebrows and looked at Hellion Vivian. When she lowered her head, she would always reveal a piece of skin behind her neck. It was very white, very tender, and very easy to bite. Thinking of this, Beligaju's gaze was somewhat unable to move away. This place had been repeatedly lingered on last night.